Pathi Singh was shot, Maharaj Swaroop was shot, 74 Gurdwara was attacked.
Cutting Singhs case of spitting tamakku in their mouths, torturing people, killing them in encounters, firing into the Sangat.
Right-wing groups stripped Sikh Bibia in Haryana on the GT road and had them stand there for 24 hours.
Basically, full-scale act of war on Sikhism.
Sant Ji's power is so much that he would say that if Indra wants to speak to the Sikhs, she comes to Darbar Sahib. We don't need to go begging to anyone. We've never received anything through this method. Where would we be if Banda Singh had written a petition? Sant Ji says in his speech, will they dare touch a Sikh now? Bhajanlal, the chief minister, will he dare touch a Sikh in Haryana now? In Singhadi power, they were able to challenge these governments.
General Bra says, we'll see to it they are on their knees in 2 hours. 5 days, they're not able to gain ground and build a position within the Parkarma. They got like 15,000 soldiers. They got heavy weapons. They've got 35,000 soldiers in reserve. And the Khalsa Fauj at this point is like less than 300. Water supply has been cut off. They're thriving off Hunne Hoye, Sholle and Guru's Karpa and the Ardasa.
What we couldn't believe was happening is what we've been reading about was happening before our eyes. Because when they got to Akaal Takhat, Sant Ji was handing out do tare khande and was saying to the Singhs, Singho je asla mukega de khanda kharka deo. I can't believe what I'm watching. This is the kind of history that we've read about and it's happening in front of our eyes.
There is no more Sikh than them. Sikhi, if ever achieved by anyone, is achieved by them.
ਸਾਡੇ ਘਰ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੀ ਸਿਰਫ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਜੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੌਣ ਕਰੇਗਾ ਦ ਬੰਦੀ ਸਿੰਘਸ ਦੈਟ ਆਰ ਇਨਸਾਈਡ ਦ ਜੇਲਸ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਦਾਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਗੁਲਾਮ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਛੱਡ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਛੱਡ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹਸੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਨਾਓ ਇਟਸ ਆਵਰ ਟਰਨ ਵਾਟ ਕੈਨ ਵੀ ਡੂ
Welcome back to this special podcast series covering 1984, marking 40 years since the Sikh Genocide. We've had 2 podcasts so far, so if you just remember from the first podcast, and make sure you check out those podcasts as well, because today we're discussing Saka 1984, but those 2 previous podcasts are very important to understand the context to everything that will be discussed today in today's podcast. So first one covering from 1469 all the way up to 1708, the Guru period. And then also when we talk about in the 18th and the 19th century, coming up to the split of India at that time into India and Pakistan. And then so on. In the last podcast, we went into so much detail just on, I'd say about 6 years, right? We spent 2-3 hours just on 6 years from 1978, not even 6 years, 4 years up to 1982, talking about the Shaheediyah of the 13 Singhs in 1978, the assassination of Guru Bachana. And then moving on into all the rest of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. And we actually went into a lot of detail on their personality as well. And a lot of the different stories linked to Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and their contributions to the Panth at that time. And then also the Shaheedi of many different Guru Sikhs at that time, including Bhai Kulwant Singh Ji. So today's podcast, as you said in the previous one, will be focusing on the Saka, but also starting with Sant Ji coming out of jail at that time and going towards Sri Darbar Sahib. And this is a very common question that people like to ask about why was Sant Ji in Sri Darbar Sahib. Otherwise, the attack wouldn't have happened on Darbar Sahib and so many innocent people wouldn't have been killed. But can we just go back into the house by Shamsher Singh Ji, if we can just talk about Darbar Sahib and the amount of attacks that have happened on Darbar Sahib. Is this the first time that Darbar Sahib was attacked?
So in July 1955, Darbar Sahib was occupied by Indian security forces at the time. The Granthi of Darbar Sahib, of Akaal Takhat Sahib and Darbar Sahib, Sangat, Langar, Sevadars were all arrested. 200 protesters were killed making their way to Darbar Sahib. And many more were injured in police violence. And all of this occurs in July 1955 because the state understood the role of Sri Darbar Sahib as the focal point of grassroots Sikh power during the Punjabi Suba Morcha, the Punjabi Suba movement that was happening there, which is a political movement for Punjabi language rights, as we talked about before. And it was a mass agitation to decentralize state power and bring more political power to Punjab. And before 1984, Darbar Sahib was occupied at least 5 times since Darbar Sahib's construction to 1984. It was completely demolished and rebuilt multiple times. After June 1984, Darbar Sahib was attacked and occupied twice more in April 1986 and May 88. and all in attempts to repress challenges to the Indian state's authority. So in total, Darbar Sahib has been invaded at least 8 times and rebuilt at least 3 times, and Akaal Takhat Sahib has been demolished and rebuilt twice. Because every imperialist Hommewadi power has understood the same thing, from like the Durrani Empire all the way to the Indian state, like the Gore in between the Farangis, that Darbar Sahib has a central role. It's a sovereign Sikh space where Sikh Sangat gather as the Guru Panth to live their Sikhi autonomously, to organize the community, to meet their social and economic needs, and to confront oppressive powers. So there's been multiple times where Janga have been led and fought from Darbar Sahib. So this is nothing new. This has always been the history of Darbar Sahib and Akaal Takhat as the centers of Sikh power. And even during Sarkar-e Khalsa and the Lahore Darbar, Akaal Takhat still remained the center of authority for the Panth. And every power understands this. And that's also where the political administration of the Panth has been. That's where all of the Morcha have been led. So it's natural that Sant Jarnail Singh was in Darbar Sahib. That's where in Akaal Takhat Sahib is Shastran di Palki from Guru Har Gobind Sahib time. So the role of Miri Piri, the role of our Shaster within our institutions has always been inseparable. And you see that again, like following Darbar Sahib, like in Sarbat Khalsa 1986, where one of the Gurmati of the Panth is that for us, our Dharam and our Shaster are inseparable, and we'll never tolerate a separation of the two. So it completely makes sense that Sant Jarnail Singh is at the space where you organize from. Sometimes SGPC is referred to as like the Sikh Parliament, that if there was an equivalent to be drawn, it would be the Akaal Takhat as the administrative body for the Panth, and Otto Agawai Sari Panth di Hundiya. So that's where the leadership of the Panth happens.
And then, just thanks for explaining that. Then how does that lead to Sant Ji actually coming to the Darbar Sahib? Because last time we learned that actually, those 4 years you spoke about Sant Ji in a lot of detail, they were not at City Darbar Sahib, as all those atrocities were taking place that the government were doing to the Sikhs. So how did they actually come to the Darbar Sahib?
So Sant Ji's shifting to Darbar Sahib at that time represents a strategic decision that they make, because they're in a larger leadership position. Before, they're largely as the Jathedar of Damdami Taksal, that's their role. But as the conflict increases, as the Sikhs are becoming more organized, Sant Jarnail Singh is kind of propelled to this position of doing the Agawai of the Panth on a larger scale. So it naturally makes sense for them to shift to Darbar Sahib. And as after their arrest and their release, that's when the shift to Darbar Sahib is made.
Essentially, at this point, Sant Ji's made, he's like a target from many groups, like lots of right-wing Hindu groups. From 81, from when they tried to encounter him in Jandokala in Haryana, he makes it out of there, comes to Mettat, and they tried to then again, like we spoke about the tanks and everything, they wanted to try and encounter Sant Ji there. So there's been at this point already in 81, there's been multiple attempts to trying to assassinate Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. And when he's released by the Singhs in 81, it was actually the Babbar Singhs who spoke to Sant Ji and said that, listen, come to Darbar Sahib now, and asi to dir teraki karenge. So the Naujawan that had mobilized around Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, and they had this symbiotic kind of relationship where he protected them and they protected him. So sare obviously ek sige and stuff at this point. And when Sant Ji comes to Guru Nanak Nawas, that's why you see all these pictures of the Nagoke Singhs. So a lot of these things basically provide armed guard, because Sant Jarnail Singh Ji is like a target from the state. So they knew that he had to be protected. So that's why we went through all his history, because sometimes when you talk about Darbar Sahib, the Hamala and stuff, it's just how he was there, but you miss out this 6-year period from 78 of all the mobilizing and all the agitation and all the work that was carried out. Even in 82, there was an attempt to encounter Sant Ji when he travelled to Bombay, and there was another attempt when he went to answer a challenge in Sirsa Again, the Babbar Singhs went with Sant Ji there as well. So there was all of these kind of things were happening. Sant Ji's answering, like he's essentially, you got the Nirankaris, the RSS, the Jan Sangh, the BJP, the government, the security forces. At this point, obviously, we're already having the state security forces are like executing Singhs, right? You know, we talked about Bhai Kulwant Singh Shaheedi. Around the same time of Bhai Kulwant Singh Shaheedi, by Amarjit Singh Deheru Shaheed, by Baljit Singh Shaheed as well. And there's been a number of violent deaths at this point. By Amrit Singh during this period of mass arrests of Sikh students and Sikh activists had gone to inquire and challenge the arrest of some innocent Gursikhs, and then the government arrested him as well, along with Baba Tara Singh. And it was actually Gurdwara who tortured both Bhai Amrit Singh and Baba Tara Singh in detention. And DSP Gurdwara is later on assassinated for this later on in 84. And when Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, who was not well at this point, and so I think some people claim that he that might have been part of another assassination attempt because he had blood in his urine and stuff, and he'd been poisoned. There's a whole story about that. When Sant Ji finds out about Bhai Amrit Singh's arrest, he finds out at the same point he gets off the phone that he finds out about Bhai Amarjit Singh Deheru Shaheedi. So it's within quick succession, you got Bhai Kulwant Singh Shaheedi, Bhai Amarjit Singh Deheru Shaheedi, and now Bhai Amrit Singh's just been arrested. And obviously, Bhai Amrit Singh and Sant Ji are very close. The son of Sant Gurdwara Singh, his mentor. So that's when Sant Ji then rushes to Darbar Sahib and does an ardas at Akaal Takhat to Guru Har Gobind Sahib to start the Morcha, the Dharam Morcha. I think it was July 1982. And when Sant Ji starts his Morcha, a Jatha of 50 Singhs every day would go and protest and court arrest. And during this period, the Akaali Dal, who again have been completely dwarfed by Sant Ji and the rise of the Naujawan, then come to Sant Ji and say that let us join this Morcha, and we will agitate for because they were trying to bring about the Anandpur Sahib resolution, which wasn't really getting any traction. All of their Morcha weren't really getting anywhere. So they were saying, let's join Morcha together for the Panth on one platform. And because even though obviously the Akalis had spent the last number of years condemning Sant Ji in press and spreading all this kind of propaganda against him, because the Anandpur Sahib revolution had certain benefits at that time, Sant Ji agreed, and there was a greater Raniti that Sant Ji was employing. But I think Bhai Sahib can speak more about the Anandpur Sahib revolution.
Yeah, I think as Bhai Sahib, we mentioned earlier, I think Akaali Dal adopted that resolution shortly after the 1978 Sabka. It was written by Kapoor Singh in 73, and I think it was amended a little for Akaali Dal to adopt it within its manifesto. And then after they adopted it, obviously they got no joy out of it, because people were with Sant Ji, and Akaali Dal was losing ground, day by day, because Sant Ji was 10 times more popular than the Akaali Dal. And then Akaali Dal suggested that, I think Akaali Dal wanted to get some mileage out of what was happening in the Sangharsh. But I think Sant Ji was, more clever than the Akaali Dal lot. He definitely, his intention to adopt those Anandpur Mate in the Dharam Yudh Morcha and to start a Morcha with the Anandpur Mate was clearly a move, which was basically catching all the eyes, as in that it could create a fear. For example, let's just say if all the Garam Dal people here right now get some sort of a joint strategy with the SDPC now, it will send hot waves to Indian government. What has happened, So I think the strategy was very clear, to get all the Sikhs under one Nishan Sahib, and Sant Ji was there at the Darbar Sahib, so basically leading the Dharam Yudh Morcha in a way. So the Dharam Yudh Morcha, if we talk about, when we talked about the 84 conflict, we said there are three different aspects to it. There is that Dharam aspect, the religion aspect. There is that personality clash as well. There's two very strong personalities. One is the Indira Gandhi and the other one is Sant Ji, and there is that clash as well. And the third thing, the main important thing is about Punjab and India. Punjab was, first of all, not reorganized on a linguistic basis. And when it was reorganized, they gave us, 1/3 of the Punjab with all the water stopped out of Punjab. So Anandpur Mata had a lot of these things in it, like give us the Chandigarh back, that is our, give us the Punjabi Bolde Ilake back, that has gone to Himachal. The kheti should be tax-free, or we should have these kind of, because we're feeding the whole India, and we should get sort of some sort of benefit out of it. There should be some tax concessions and everything. And then the other thing was that Kurukshetra for Hindus, and a lot of other Haridwar and a lot of other cities, they have a Pavitra Shahr Darja. So basically, they're dry states. So you can't have alcohol. You can't sell alcohol legally in those states.
Not just dry. Vaishnu Mandir, I think Sant Ji mentions Vaishnu Mandir. You can't even take garlic or onion. Sant Ji mentions
Garlic or onion,
in there, Hana. So and then of course there was the Morcha against tobacco around Harmandir. So Sant Ji's drawing these parallels regularly in their speeches.
He's saying if you can give them Pavitra Shahr Darja, why can't you give Darbar Sahib the Pavitra, Amritsar Sahib the Pavitra Shahr Darja? And the other things were, obviously, there was a train that it should be named on Darbar Sahib, and there was a radio channel that we should be given a radio channel for Prasar of Gurbani. But essentially, there were a lot of other things which did not just belong to the farmer community or the Sikh community. It was all about the Punjab, for the whole of the Punjab.
And even like all states in India as well, because it was pushing for like a decentralized federal structure, which India was supposed to be from the outset.
Yeah, I think you're right. So all these mate of Anandpur mate, these resolutions, they were going to help Punjab get some of its lost, status back in terms of autonomy. But then there was a lot about Pani as well, that we're still fighting a lot of these things right now. And we are kind of facing the repercussions of the water being deviated out of Punjab. And that was another main part of the Anandpur Mata. But all of these mate were like, as I said, was talking about the larger picture of Punjab. However, because there was a strong connection between, what the Sikh sentiment at that time was, and with the Punjab sentiment, the central government feared, a big civil disobedience movement, which actually happened afterwards. ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਰਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਨੀਆਂ, ਗ੍ਰਿਫਤਾਰੀ ਜਥੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਰਹੇ, then there was civil disobedience. Even ਇਹ ਵੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸੀ ਕਿ, because we are contributing so much towards the India's bread basket. What if we, if they don't compromise, if they don't, come somewhere in the middle with these shartan, then we might as well just stop sending them food grains, So what's going to happen then? It's going to just cripple down the whole system for them. So I think that's what Indian state feared at large. That what if Punjab turns it back on India, before they do something, it'll be a big, massive problem. Big, massive problem for India.
I think as most political analysts as well have studied the Anandpur Sahib resolution, it's not like a sectarian document. It's not discriminatory to any kind of any individual or any minority or any group in India. It's purely just the social, political, economic rights for all Punjabis, right? And I personally believe, if you listen to Sant Ji's speeches, that he didn't have much faith that the Indian state was actually going to come through with any of these demands, which they never did during the Morcha either. But under Sant Ji's kind of leadership, with him being there at the helm, the Jathe that went to court arrest, the Bibi and the Jathe, it went between that 18-month period, it went up to like, it was 2 lakh, like 200,000. And like they filled out the prisons, they filled out hospitals and schools and etc. Like it was such a huge movement. And just to consider that that's like 4 times the number of people that went to prison for the whole of India's independence movement. It shows how big and popular that was. But Sant Ji took this opportunity to speak to the Jathe and speak to the Sangathan that were coming. Tens of thousands of people are taking Amrit every month now. Like a huge number. And Sant Ji is using this opportunity to speak to the Sangat. And through that, he's completely destroying this idea of any sort of success through like this so-called democratic model. So I always found that kind of curious years ago, that like, how come, at the same time he's part of this Dharam Morcha, but he's saying to this Sangat that, remember, like, we've never received anything through this method. Where would we be if Banda Singh had written a petition, and etc., right? So he's saying that like at the same way in 78, where he accepts the Panthik decision that the Panth's going to take this court case forward. The same way, Sant Ji is saying that, but if we're going to push for the Anandpur revolution, we're going to go all the way. So he makes him and the Akaali leaders swear oaths at Akaal Takht that asi Shaheed ho jayenge, but we won't step back from the Anandpur revolution. So you end up with this kind of triangle between the Akaali Dal, the central government, and Sant Ji, because the Akaali Dal were all too willing to negotiate and compromise just for their own personal gain. But now that Sant Ji is involved, and he's publicly saying, and he's saying this in his speeches, that like, I'm your watchman to the Sangat, right? I'm your servant. I'll make sure, I'll let you know if they try to backtrack, and if I backtrack from my stance, then you know what you could do to me and stuff. But
he says in one of his speeches, he says, "Ek ta jiriyan gallan likhiyan hain," and he's like, so one is the things that have been written in the Anandpur Sahib resolution, but on the other is the things that have been said in front of the Sangat. And he's like, I'm going to hold them to account on both. And I always found that really fascinating, because you see that same kind of that same game kind of being playing today, where people in writing will say one thing, like within Panthik spaces or the government, and when it comes to actually addressing the Sangat, they go a bit further. Sometimes they get a bit gassed and they get a bit more excited, and they might say something else. And Sant Ji's like, I'm going to hold them to account for both of these things, and he does that like throughout. And I think what Sant Ji kind of learns, and like the kind of experience that they have collectively, Sant Ji, all the rest of the Singhs, through that whole 1978 process with Gurdwara, with the court case, with kind of seeing the true face of the Indian state, that prepares them, because that's like a smaller example of what's happening now with the Dharam Yudh Morcha. It's a much larger kind of like a political issue. But the tactic remains the same. Is like, let's get them to put their cards on the table. Let's get them to commit. And where Sant Ji says we're not going to back down 1 millimeter, really his plan was to go like take a massive leap from Anandpur Sahib resolution all the way to like Azadi and Shahadat, and chart a course that people weren't prepared for at that time, but the ground had to be prepared for them to understand what it means to be a citizen within India, and what it means to actually pursue something that you're not allowed to have, which is your azadi.
And I think another good thing that happened with Sant Ji being at Akaal Takht is to then open him to general public. Not everybody will go to Mehta. It was more Taksal centric or Sangharsh centric people, but with him being at Guru Nanak Niwas, all the Sangat that used to come for darshan, they were actually saying, okay, Sant Ji baithe ne, una de darshan kar rahe hain, koi, they used to listen to him. So actually he was at the very center of the Sikh community, and addressing every single household, every single person. So the message of Sangharsh is actually going into each and every household, because Darbar Sahib is the epicenter for the Sikhs, and it will always remain one. And that's what they fear the most, because they know कि इत्थों दी एक तख्त ਨੂੰ ਵੰਗਾਰਨ ਲਈ ਦੂਜੇ ਤਖਤ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਇੱਕ ਤਖਤ ਨੂੰ ਦੂਸਰੇ ਤਖਤ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਵੰਗਾਰਿਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ, and that was Akaal Takht. It was always been Akaal Takht for Sikhs.
And the reason why it was never going to be successful is because the triangle that they were stuck in order to give Punjab its rights that had been taken away from it through the Reorganisation Act and through partition, the Hindu majority states that surrounded Punjab, like Haryana, that was created through the Reorganisation Act, would have to give up their kind of ill-gotten gains. And obviously, electorally, politically, that wouldn't work for Indra, right? So you couldn't go against 3 or 4 Hindu majority states to try and please the Akalis. So she was stuck on that side. So she was saying to the Akalis in their negotiations that like Rajasthan, Delhi, Haryana, they're not gonna agree to like Chandigarh going back to Punjab, and all these areas going back to Punjab. Try this. How about just this? How about you can do like we refer these things to the commission, all these other kind of negotiations. And the Akalis were like, he's not going to accept that though. And at this point, Sant Ji's his power is so much that Indra, whatever discussion that Indra and the Akalis have, she says to them that unless he signs off on it, our negotiation, our agreement means nothing. So whatever they used to come to, whatever decision or conclusion they used to come to, she would always say to them that like, unless you can get it, unless he can agree to it, it doesn't mean anything. And that's where the true power lied, right, within the Sikh Sangharsh. And the other reason why I believe that Sant Ji didn't have any faith in this system, because firstly, for the Gur Sikhs, from 1978, when you got the same central government that's attacking the Guru's Darbar, right? The same government that's orchestrating Byadviyan, the burning of Sarups, they have no faith. It's only people that are stuck within that system and have no other hope, no other option but the system, that they will keep trying that same thing. And they're going to still. And Sant Ji was using this analogy in the speeches where he would say that like, you know, or 6 months or a year, but we're going to have to come back to this point at one point. We're going to have to wake up and see. But the reason why, like, again, another point that proves that Sant Ji had no real faith in this is he himself never met any of these leaders. He himself wouldn't go to any of these meetings. And he would say that if Indra wants to speak to the Sikhs, she comes to Darbar Sahib. This is where we don't need to go begging to anyone. So, but he himself never involves himself or any of his, like, you know, Bhai Amritsar or anyone else. They never go and take part in this system.
Sant Ji maintains that position right to the very, very end. Even the latest interviews, they have like Indira Gandhi, we touched in the earlier podcast. Even though Sant Ji knows, and of course it's in the air, it's in the air already. We have the Mana Wala Kand, right, where Singh Shaheed hunda utthe by Hardev Singh Rodde, by Hardev Singh Ji utthe Shaheed hunde. So already the government is maneuvering towards like some sort of confrontational situation, but fir vi Sant Ji maintains the public opinion. Moving to Akaal Takhat Sahib opens them up to hold court. I think Mark Tully writes the Sant holds court. ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਵਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਲੋਕੀ ਆ ਕੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ it opens them up to the wider Sikh community and beyond and beyond. So Sant Ji still there is maintaining this position ਕਿ ਹਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਇੰਦਰਾ ਗਾਂਧੀ ਆ ਕੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲ ਪਵੇ, even though they know, but that's giving like this should be leaving no doubts, this is leaving no doubts ਕਿ they don't want this. They don't want this. ਹੁਣ ਜਦ ਕੋਈ ਉੱਥੇ like foreign journalists on it, they're not harmed. They, you know, prashada mani shak ke ho jande a, they're treated with like nicely. They want an interview, they get an interview, they get a translator, they get everybody that's coming there is getting their ardasan done, or we've talked about social issues getting resolved there whilst Sant Ji is doing it. So that's the problem, innit? Sant Ji's there is running parallel state style again.
And it's this kind of bluff thing between like Sant Ji and Indra, because Sant Ji knows that she's not going to concede to any of these demands, and she knows that truly this isn't what someone close to Indra said to her, like, it's just very simple demands and they're quite equitable demands, why don't you grant them? And she says this is not what they truly want. Like, if we give them this, they're going to continue. It's never going to stop, because they understand that the true Bhavanama of the Sikh is to be free.
So that's why they attack. And then we'll go into the wall, the Gurdwara, the commando operation on Sant Ji. And there is obviously like some reference of there's a commando operations plan for Sant Ji. Sundown. That's rejected, even though that like it seems like the less hostile way to capture Sant. Even the idea we're even capturing Sant now is still a bit absurd, really. Was they holding a free press and doing interviews? You know, we needed Sant Jarnail Singh Ji right now. I think that again the official narrative is they were ready to declare Khalistan, which again, firstly, we already discussed this in the previous podcasts. Some Sikh Jathebandi moved towards Khalistan as the only monk, as in bypassing the Ji Anandpur Mata Milyata position of Sant Jarnail. They bypassed that to go straight to Khalistan, but Sant Ji still maintains that position. So ki hoya odon da jira thanu lagda se ki vi dasse Khalistan, of course there's hostilities towards the state. I'm also going to have to there's hostilities from the state. We're talking about the going to jails, Sikh jailan bharan ਲੱਗ ਪਏ ਸੀ to demand the release of Bhai Singh Ji, Baba Singh Ji. After that, there's like the Rasta Roko kind of programs. So civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is, we have that. I know. So these are the kind of things that they're facing. And again, how is the state responding? The state responding, I think, in Gurdwara, I think, 24 Sikhan the Shaheedi hundi are fired upon on a civil disobedience. So again, look, whilst we've done filling up the jails, we're using all the kind of tools at our disposal, but Firvi, the hostility of the Sarkar isn't slowing down, so much so that then the Sikhs do have to take things into जिदा आपा क्या गुरु बचने वाली, then फिर आप फिर इंसाफ करना पिया, and later the CIA in charge, criminal investigation agencies in charge there for Gurdwara is shot dead, and by Surinder Singh Sodhi and Mulabir Singh Chahir, who claim responsibility for that as a direct response for the Shaheediyan of the Singhs for the Rasta Roko program.
Just when you say civil disobedience, what does that refer to specifically?
So during the time of the Morcha, in pursuance of the Morcha to put pressure on the state, they were exercising all of the kind of models of like diplomatic, democratic kind of protest. So they would block the roads, and obviously again, like there was so much support in Punjab that they would like Rasta Roko, trains Roko, and like all the trains would be shut down across Punjab. The roads would get shut down, businesses would shut down, shops would shut down, and even still, even though there was so much support for it, like that still didn't move the government. And what the government wanted to do instead was try to disband and try to derail the peaceful, civil disobedience project, the program, by introducing like violence. So the firing on unarmed protesters, these are all things that the Amnesty and etc. have fully documented. So during this 18 months, 220 Sikh are Shaheed, for peacefully demonstrating. And not just that, but they tried to antagonize the Sikhs as well. So during one of these Rasta Roko campaigns, they would like take Singhs to the police station. They would like cut their gears. They would like spit the maku in their mouths. They would like strip bibia, and obviously one of the like balatkar honda siga in the station. So all of these things would happen, and they were doing this because they knew that they needed to stop the Dharmic Morcha. And what Sant Ji did, which is like Raniti, that he said that we're not going to disband, we're not going to stop the Dharmic Morcha because we want to show the Sikh that we'll take this all the way, as far as anyone can try to push like a civil disobedience program. But at the same time, obviously, we can't let those things go unanswered. So that's when the Sikhs, like by General Labh Singh, who had left the police, Sikhs had left the security forces in droves. You had Baba Manachar left the army. You had General Shabeg Singh that left the army. There's several generals that left the army. So then those Gota Sikhs who had that, who had that Bhavanama, Sant Ji would then use them and have them take badala. I mean, if the state themselves, the security forces were meant to protect the citizens, they themselves are perpetrating this kind of oppression on the people, then obviously that's when obviously people like Bhai Surinder Singh Sodhi, General Labh Singh, Baba Manachal, all these Gota Sikhs, then they took and
General Labh Singh, who he refers to, is by Sukhdev Singh of Panjwad, and he becomes pivotal later in both financing and creating a bit of a structure around the Khalistan movement. And he's referred to as Labh Singh as famously as when the story is when he leaves the police force, he leaves his police naukri and he puts his service rifle before Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. The Sant Ji says कि पंथ नू बहुत लाभ होया, the पंथ has profited from him joining, and that's kind of like the button. And then later on he goes and pursues that to great degrees, by being quite very very pivotal in the Khalistan movement. So yeah, these characters now are already set. So we have Manu Chal, General Labh Singh, we have these characters set who will then later on take this Sangharsh into the next phase post the attack already.
And the Darbar Sahib itself, if you can imagine what kind of a space this was, so you got Sant Ji's there, and like he's giving doing prachar every day, Amrit Sanchar ho raha, and then it's operating as it should, as an autonomous space, a sovereign space. You've got the Babbar Khalsa there, their headquarters are there, the All India Sikh Federation, they're there, National Council of Khalistan, the Dal Khalsa, the Akaal Federation. So all of these groups now have a place, and they're operating from the precincts of like Darbar Sahib, and Sant Ji's, like he's the figure that's like protecting them from like the state. So like, he's constantly saying that like, they're going to have to walk over my body to touch any of these things. Yeah. So they were protected and cultivating this kind of atmosphere.
And all of these Jathebandiya, all these organizations that Bhai Sahib just mentioned have like to mainstream, have a hardline position, right? They all have a hardline position. And weaving in between all of it, trying to find space and trying to make way for themselves, is the Shromani Akaali Dal. Between all of these various, can we get hedging bets again, right? Between where shall we go, right? Because they don't have a place now, and that's really interesting as well, because like Sant Ji is kind of like forcing the likes of Captain have to sign up to. Yeah, I guess so. Anandpur Sahib resolution, Dharam Morcha.
It's interesting, actually, like the whole of the Akaali Dal unite. It's the first time in their history that they all had to unite under one platform. So the Akaali Dal itself had never been, had ekta. But through like the Dharam Morcha, Sant Ji was able to like bring them together. It's a cool story where he actually goes to Delhi, where one of the Akaali leaders, Talwandi, right?
Talwandi, yeah.
Jagdev Singh Talwandi, he was there in Tihar jail. And Sant Ji goes to meet him. And the interesting thing is like the DGP of Delhi police at the time, the same police officer who meets Harjinder Singh Jinda and talks about him, he speaks about how when Sant Ji makes his declaration, Sant Ji's not like filling out prisoner, what's it called again? Prisoner. When you try to go meet a prisoner, like a
visitation.
He's not filling out any visitation orders. He just announces it. So there he goes, Sanu Pajra Pegi, and that they're coming with their 150 Singh and they're armed and stuff. Like, what do we do? And they didn't. But at the same time, they couldn't challenge him. They couldn't stop him. And he said that it just luckily it went off without a hitch. They came, they met, and then they left, and nothing had happened. But they were like, again, like each time, each more, they're like, oh, the dardes, he get like, how are we going to deal with this? And when Sant Ji meets Talwandi, he says to him that, look, you need to come back to Amritsar, because Talwandi was doing his own stuff in Delhi at the time, and he goes, you need to unite with all the Akali factions. So they were able to bring them all under one thing. And one thing's interesting is through all of these like 18 months of like Morcha after Morcha, the image of the Akali Dal is just diminishing and diminishing and diminishing, and with it, this idea of the Indian state, its democracy, because obviously the Sangat are seeing that they are responding to each peaceful Morcha with violence and brutality, and this is obviously what builds the foundation towards Khalistan.
And if there is any Shromani Akaali Dal watching this, the only time the Shromani Akaali Dal has been relevant is when it's taken on these hardline positions, and as soon as it started abandoning the central ethos of like Sikh related issues, it becomes irrelevant, and it becomes a joke, and it becomes like an instrument just used by opposition leaders, like it becomes like a tennis ball in a match between other people, so that would be where we need if any political representation to be true to the core of, is those hardline positions, like Baji is describing, those kind of factions coexisting in the Parkarma of Harmandir Sahib. What better place to coexist?
I think there is one thing that you need to note here. This is one side of the thing that we notice. What was Sarkar doing to the Singhs and all these atrocities and the way they were replying to all the Morcha and everything. But on the other side, within their TV channels, within their radio, they're trying to portray Sikhs as outlaw now, big time. At the same time, that they've colluded with Pakistan. More of Hathiars are coming in. This is the story they're telling their public, their majority, trying to convince the attack in advance, if you know what I mean. That what we did was actually a service to Sikh community and the Sikh people, because people are frightened to go in Darbar Sahib with all these stories, So that is what India was trying to do. And I think for Indira Gandhi, it was the next election move as well. Now, this is worth noticing. Whenever they want to win an election, they will do something drastic against a minority. Term them outlaw first, term them anti-nationalist, do something absurd to them, like an atrocity, and then convince the majority that we've actually done that for you. Do you know what I mean? Just to protect your interests, because over there from Darbar Sahib, this is what they were saying. Every day, Hindus are being, they fear their life in Punjab now. Well, if that was the case, then after the Delhi Sikh genocide, the same could have happened to Hindus in Punjab, but that didn't happen. Because, that's not our way of responding to things. That's not the way we work, right? So that was one thing, that all that fear, it's like, America saying Saddam Hussein's got a lot of biological weapons, and let's raid Iraq. And that's what happened. They raided Darbar Sahib, they ਜਿੰਨਾ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਢਾਹ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਕੀ ਮਿਲਿਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਹਥਿਆਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ. they were only defending them with very sort of basic ਹਥਿਆਰ, we didn't have any advanced LMGs or machine guns or anything. So what I'm trying to say here is they are trying to build a parallel to convince the majority of the nation. Before you commit a genocide, you have to convince the majority of that nation that this is actually a very nationalistic act to protect the majority.
A righteous act.
And interestingly, that narrative only happened after the attack.
Yeah.
So like after the attack, they started talking about Pakistan and like foreign interference and this, that, the other. And actually, in the Indian Parliament, there is a debate between the opposition parties and the Congress government where they say to the Congress government that this is the first time you lot have mentioned Pakistan. And like, you're talking about Sant Jarnail Singh Ji this way, but you've never mentioned this all the way throughout. So this narrative, they tried to build up this justification following the attack, because it essentially what was happening, it got out of hand, it got out of their control. So in the CRPF, they had like a annual magazine, and in there, Indra writes in there to the CRPF that the army action taken in Darbar Sahib in June was that if we had waited any longer, it was getting to the point where there was no action left to take. Because you remember the courts were emptying, like people were completely like, there were some analysts saying that all they've got to do is issue currency. Like the political systems failed. SGPC, the Akaali Dal kisi nu koi manda bhi nahi, and like all the situations are getting handled within the Darbar Sahib at Akaal Takhat, any kind of niji masale, court issues, they were coming to the Darbar Sahib and handling that. The courts were emptying. So that's what their fear was.
I think Paji is absolutely right. They did the act and then built the justification to it. But then that just tells you, was it that easy to attack Darbar Sahib for them? You will never do that to your citizens, do you? Even if you have little respect for the sacrifices they made for this, the whole system to be Ajad. I mean, at the end, they got the Ajadi. We never tasted the Ajadi, But then, was it that easy? Was it that easy to attack somebody's religious epicenter, not even thinking twice of the repercussions? And I think she knew, Indira Gandhi knew in hearts of hearts that she's done wrong and her days are numbered now. She knew that. I mean, all their friends, they were meeting her. I think they have their testimonies about it. So, but what was happening in Punjab, they always fear, because Punjab always starts a trend that, that leads to other uprisings as well. It's been history, always been history. And that's why even today, if we talk about, referendum, such a small thing, it's just voting. But they fear it because they think they're going to start a trend and it's going to go all over and it'll finish their state off. And that's how they fear. But I think with Sant Ji was very cleverly, navigating Sikhan the energy and channelizing it into a direction that a sara kuch karke vekh lo, exhaust all your means, and eventually you're going to realize what the way is,
There's a photo, and in that photo, like Sant Jarnail Singh sitting on a manja, there's other, like, Namvar Singh sitting around them, like General Shabeg Singh Huni. And on the wall behind them, they've got written a list of names of like the Singhs that were Shaheed in the early kind of days, right? Like Kalwan Singh Nagoke, some of the Singhs that we spoke about, like from the Deheru Kand, etc. Some that we don't even know their stories about. Like there's one by Baljit Singh mentioned on there. We don't know much about their Ityas and stuff. And they're smiling, like it's a casual kind of moment where that photo is taken, and they're sitting there in like that spirit of Chardi Kala. And for me, that like moment, that photo is like reflective of the larger lesson to be learnt from Darbar Sahib, because that photo shows the starting point for Sant Jarnail Singh. Like it's not, starting point isn't, like some long-winded kind of convoluted position of like eventually we'll go through this and we'll get to that, right? Like the Akaali Dal was trying to do. For them, it's like Singh Shaheed hoya, another, Shaheed the mulla si pona. We want to put the price that we deem fit on for those, in exchange of those Shaheed diyan, right? And that's like the starting point. And in the same way, the Darbar Sahib, invasion and the jung, it teaches us many things about the so-called modern nation state and the relationship, its actual real relationship with the Guru Khalsa Panth. And in that way, it connects the Battle of Darbar Sahib in June. It's a continuity of Sikh revolution throughout every era of our Ityas, right? So like the modern nation state, it gets... it's proliferated under this process of colonization, and that's how it's that state structure is imposed on places. And in order to impose it, you got to eliminate the indigenous people's expression of sovereignty. So before the Indian states created, you had multiple competing sovereignties. It was a Sikh Raj had its own claim of sovereignty. Other Rajasthaniya, other rules had their own claims. So you got to eliminate all of that sovereignty, indigenous sovereignty, and replace it with an authoritarian model. An authoritarian model is like, we dictate terms to you, and the whole point of that is to exploit the land and the people for the profit of empire. And this model has been developed and deployed by these imperialist structures to make exploitation more efficient throughout the whole colonized world. And this is the structure that Sikhs are encountering. So as you have the Yudh Morcha running, it's not the Yudh Morcha is happening and then afterwards something else happens. What Sant Jarnail Singh is doing in parallel to the Yudh Morcha is developing and reviving the Khalsa's ways of governance. So he's showing the limitations of the Yudh Morcha just as they show the limitations of like the court case and the rest of it. But they're taking the people along with them at that moment, and they're showing there's at the heart of it is conflicting concepts of the nature of sovereignty itself. So the Indian state says this is our sovereignty and it looks like this, and on the other hand you've got the Khalsa Panth's sovereign status as the Guru Khalsa, and you have their own relationship with their spaces, whether it's Darbar Sahib or Akaal Takhat, and the relationship between the Guru Khalsa and the Akaal Takhat and other sovereignties. So what is the relationship really between Akaal Takhat and the Indian state? And that conflict, those competing sovereignties, is right at the center of it. And so one of the defining characteristics of the modern state is its exclusive claim to sovereignty. So the state exists and it has absolute sovereignty over the land and the bodies within its borders and its jurisdiction. And it can't, in order for that to work, there can be no conflicting claim to sovereignty. So you can't have the sovereignty of the Indian state, and like the sovereignty of the UK government, and then Sikhs declare their own competing sovereignty. Or they need absolute claim of sovereignty in order for them to maintain control over territory, right? And this control is secured and maintained through the facade of law and order, which we've talked about, in previous episodes, and also the monopoly of the legitimate use of violence. So the state dictates what is law and order, and then the state also has the only right to use violence when it deems fit. So when Sikhs are being attacked in Malerkotla, before 1984, their dariyan being cut, they're being spat at, Gurdwara being burnt, Bibiya being raped in police stations, that is the state using its legitimate violence in order to crush a movement that is challenging its authority. That's legitimate violence. But if a Sikh at that time picks up a weapon and goes kills a police officer and says, I'm killing you because you did this, that then becomes an illegitimate form of violence. So in that sense, in that equation, a Sri Akaal Takhat Sahib and any Gurdwara can only ever be a place of worship under the sovereignty of the state. It can't be anything else. So how today we talk about the Gurdwara as a place of worship, and it's kind of become it reminds me of a point from a previous episode, Paji's talking about Man Sikh Gulami, where we've kind of internalized that narrative, right? The Gurdwara is a place of worship and it's subordinated under the authority of the state. So Bhai Khan Singh Nabha says, in order for there to be a Gurdwara, you need Sheh Cheejan, Akali Bani da utte prasar hove, Bhukhiyan le langar, Rogiyan le dua khana, Rahe Karahe Jandiyan le sara, and dunya de gyan da ek kender, and dushman de hamle nu rokan waste ek kila. So you're fulfilling this prachar of Bani happening, you're educating people on a dunyavi sense, you're feeding the hungry, you're looking after travelers, you're addressing the medical needs of people, but also it's a fortress to stop the wave of the oppressor. And the Gurdwara has always been this space. So in that sense, the Guru Khalsa Panth, under the leadership of Sant Jarnail Singh, it reaffirms this commitment of what a sovereign Sikh space should look like, what our Path Shaheed should look like, and it reasserts sovereign Sikh authority to maintain shaster and to use those shaster as they deem fit as a sovereign entity. And so in every other struggle throughout all of our itihas, the Gurdwara is the sovereign space that manifests this power, the grassroots power of the Khalsa. It becomes the focal point naturally. It becomes the space where Sikhs are being educated, trained, mobilized. The Guru Ka has always been at the center of the Panths mobilizing and developing, and this is the space where jithe
and just one thing, and the people who kind of object to the Battle of Amritsar, who have an issue with like the arms and the Singhs defending Darbar Sahib, they're the ones who don't understand this concept. They're the ones who see like the Guru Ka as just like a shrine, and that's why they were so some people are so offended that like this place of worship was used and etc. When as like Pastor was saying that like this has always been like a killer for us, and Guru Ka is meant to be.
And so the purpose of that invasion, the purpose of the attack, very clearly was about eliminating those Sikhs asserting their sovereignty and challenging the sovereignty of the Indian state, directly challenging the sovereignty of the Indian state, and reasserting the control over sovereign Sikh spaces under the guise of state law, secularism, identity, or whatever. So taking out of, using the genocidal violence, the state wanted to restore the status quo. So bring the Akalis back into control, bring the SGPC back into control, eliminate anybody that was buggy, and only bring those to the forefront that wanted to engage in this politics of subedari, etc. But what you see in June is Purja Kattamare Kabuna Shadde Khet, right? Like Guru Sahib da Furman hai, like that spirit that you see of those things during that time, it manifests that spirit of Surbirta, that this is asi hun Madan de vich aa gaye ha, and we've entered into the battlefield. We've entered into the battlefield with ye Gurpir hai hamare, with our shaster, and for us this, there's no separation now between like our Dharam, our sovereignty, and our Gurtam. Ye sare katthe hai sade vaste. That you can't pull and pick pieces out. You can't say Shastra don't have a place here, or the Gurdwara is just for this, or your sovereignty can't exist under the Indian state. Is ye sariyan cheezaं kattiyan kar liyan, and Sant Jarnail Singh and all those Sikhs, like for me, and it's the focal point of that memory of June isn't like, mare gaye, or like this profit or loss, or like, the violence that was inflicted on us. It is about the possibilities and the Khalsa reasserting their sovereignty within that form, trying to exist as, in this azad roop, and just trying to ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਚਰਨ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹ that they were doing successfully. That's what that June 84 shows, that spirit, that underlying thing that can't be destroyed. It just needs to be expressed, and Santan ne express karti, or Singhaniyan ne express karti, and like the whole power of the state came. And when they came very clearly that, what was it General Bra said? He said, we cannot allow a few scoundrels to hold the country
at ransom.
At ransom. So in like, Virji was saying, like, it's not like they had nuclear weapons, that they were holding a nuclear armed India to ransom. So what was it that they were holding? That they put it all on ransom, they put all of Bharat's power on a platter. It was because they asserted their Patshahi, and they challenged the very concept, the very foundation of what the Indian state was. And in that way, June teaches us this really like Dunga lesson about like that we are prepared, and that the Sikhs will be prepared in order to engage in this conflict. Because just as the Indian state was preparing and escalating its violence, that you see like from Nirankaris to like, the encounter killing and the torture of Kulwant Singh Nagoke, to turning that into like large-scale killings. At the same time, Sikhs were becoming jatheband, gaining weapons, fortifying their positions, moving in ways in which they were carrying out targeted assassinations of police officers that they were holding responsible for violence against the Sikhs. So you see an escalation on both parties. And the Indian state, without a shadow of a doubt, had the power to field a massive military force, and they did so. Like tens of thousands of soldiers, tanks, helicopters, etc. But Sant Jarnail Singh and the Singhs had the power to bring the Dushman into that Maidan. And then, like they say those prophetic, those words, ke, jado Darbar Sahib de kere de vich fauj aogi, Khalistan di nee rakhi jogi, that captures what the essence of that jung is. They wanted to pull them into a conflict.
And even with that, what you just mentioned around where Sant Jarnail Singh Ji was taking the conversation, and you said, how were they holding him to ransom? Sorry, what did they have? They had ideology, and they're holding that to ransom. And it's just something interesting. When the one of the Swamis, I forget his name, not Subramanian Swami, the other one, Vishnu Mundra, I think his name is. When he comes and meets Sant, and then there's like two people translating and stuff like that, and they're putting things to Sant, and he's like, he finally gets into it, like a really long introduction of like a respectful, like pleasantries, and then he finally gets into it. He goes, what do you want, Hannah? And when Sant Ji is talking about Haq and all this kind of stuff, and automatically his go-to is, but then everybody would want that. And Sant Ji goes, that's the point.
The funny thing in that,
that's the point. That's what we're trying to kind of show here. We've just talked about kind of colonization, like just changing power, Hannah? Like just changing clothes, so to speak. And Sant Ji is here, like saying, that's you get it. Right?
There's a funny thing in exchange as well, is where the Swami says to Sant Ji, he goes, and also these weapons and stuff that you could burn by
the Trishul.
Yeah. He goes, what's up with them? These weapons and stuff. Like, this is supposed to be a religious place, a place of Dharam. And Sant Ji goes, in the mandirs, and you have the Trishul there, and he goes, "What the Bhagwan ka hai?" And he goes, "I bhi Bhagwan."
Yeah.
Just to bring the conversation back towards the actual Sakla now, because I think we've spoke a lot, given a lot of context. One thing that was really good that you demystified with the Bhai Gaan Singh Nalba's definition of a Gurdwara Sahib was that whole of their shaster. That they said why they Sant Ji being shastered into the Darbar Sahib Akaal Takhat Sahib. But if anyone's been to Gurdwara Sahib, most Gurukars your matha take to Shaster as well, so the Shaster already in.
And just a practical answer, because I think that's also I think that's warranted now. We've clearly taken the discussion there, why or how were the Shasters in there? Well, largely two ways. Some were bought from other states. It is understood that some were bought from other states, with some of the Singhs, especially from the Rodde family, that were truck drivers. So like the old Desi kind of hathiars were bought in that way. Secondly, when the Sikhs were at loggerheads with the police due to these reasons, due to like everyday Sikhan da kaan hunda hai, right? Sikhs are being disrespected, fired upon, nihathe Sikhan te war hunda hai, right? So this kind of these cells of Sikhs made it their responsibility to steal hathiar from the police force, because we were already at loggerheads, oh jahan sade bajaniyan si ho, right? So in their hands they were always a threat. So it was kind of like across the Singhs from the Babbar Khalsa and the Singhs from the by Surinder Singh Sodhi honi, they made the faisla saying we sade te chaliyan, we're going to take them off him. So that's how the hathiar, that's why, that's how.
And that's the thing, we some shares spoke about, and these things are spoken about as well, that like it was this escalation. And like, when you were talking about like how the government tries to re-exert its control, what's interesting is, first it was through the security forces, the CRPF, the BSF, the police force, and they were committing like massive amounts of atrocities on like innocent Sikhs to try to kind of like dissuade the Singhs from this Morcha. And when the Singhs would then do targeted assassinations, and they basically held all those police officers accountable, then the police officer, they were like, we don't want the smoke. And then after that, it was the rise of the Hindu kind of right-wing organization. So like the chief minister of Haryana, like Bhajan Lal, there was a Punjab Bandh in February 1984 where they closed the whole of Punjab, like the Sikhs did as part of the Morcha. And in response to that, all of these like acts of violence that were happening always coincided with the Morcha like dates to try to like derail it. And when the Sikhs did that in Punjab, the right-wing groups in Punjab and Haryana did their own bandh. And in their bandh, they killed, I think, about 12 Gursikhs in Haryana. They burnt like 8 Gurukars. And they also stripped like Sikh Bibia in Haryana on the GT road and had them stand there for 24 hours. And this is what I was saying about like the image of the state the image of the Akaali Dal kept diminishing, because the Akaali Dal in response issued a condemnation. And Sant Ji finally at this point, he's never really spoken against the Akaali Dal. He's saying, listen, because our brothers at the Akaali Dal, he goes, what is their formula? And their formula is to write to the same people who are doing this. And he goes, and then when some Gur Sikhs couldn't take this any longer, and then so basically on like over a weekend in I think it was around March, April, about 20 members of these right-wing organizations like the President, the Pradhans, and all of these fascist organizations in Haryana, they all got taken out. And then all of a sudden the police force are quiet now, and these right-wing groups are quiet. And Sant Ji even says this, like there's no encounter killings in 84. Because Sant Ji says in a speech, he goes, "Hun vi ohi police hai." This is the same security forces in Punjab now. Will they dare touch a Sikh now? And he goes, Bhajan Lal, the chief minister, he goes, he's the same chief minister that's in Haryana now. Will he dare touch a Sikh in Haryana now? So inni ona di jada like Singha di power see that they were able to kind of challenge these governments. And that's why obviously then when the government ran out of all these kind of other like brutal means, then like Sheda was saying, though, then they had to like come fully with the full might.
And you know the thing is, they came, you know, like the vision behind it was, we're going to bring an overwhelming force with us, military force, and we're going to inflict a crushing and a humiliating defeat on the Sikhs, that they're going to forget, you know, who Sant Ji was, and they're going to forget, you know, that Darbar Sahib was anything more than a Gurdwara. And that's the intention that they came with. But, you know, little did they realize over the next 10 days, like Sikhs were prepared and would fight to literally their last bullet and take that fight beyond. And in that sense, that whole thing was a complete blunder for the Indian government and their military historians. They see Darbar Sahib's Hamla as a blunder, not because of the civilians they killed or like the children they killed afterwards or the atrocities they committed, because militarily this whole, you know, quote unquote operation failed to achieve its objective, its tactical objective, which was to crush any competing Sikh sovereignty or any, you know, idea that Sikhs had that they could go outside the remit of the state and, you know, carry out armed actions on their own terms.
Can you take us now to that, Bhai? Because you just mentioned from February, March and April examples. So now we're going into May and June. So how is June the 1st coming about? What's the build up to that?
So on the Sikh side, Sikhs had been fortifying the position. Sant Jarnail Singh, Bhai Singh Huni, for a long time before, you know, as Singh mentioned, that Sikhs that were in the Indian military were defecting, dropping down their weapons, coming to Sant Jarnail Singh, and he had a steady stream of intelligence that was flowing. So they had not only these, you know, some highly decorated soldiers like General Shabeg Singh, etc., you know, defecting towards the Sikh side. You know, one Singh tells the story that when he was a child, he went to he was going to join the military, and he had got into the military, and he went with his dad to like Darbar Sahib, and when he got there, like, you know, they saw Sant Jarnail Singh, you know, Bachan Sune, whatever, and his dad said to him, like, "Kon tu sachi sarkar di fauj ch bharti ho ja, Bharat di fauj chhad de." And so like you had like this whole kind of continual wave of Sikhs joining. So the Sikhs were gathering intelligence. They knew some kind of military intervention was coming. They didn't know exactly when it was planned for. They were getting information that, you know, the Indian government was carrying out. They had built a whole replica of Darbar Sahib in the Doon Valley, and they were carrying out like commando raids, etc. Like,
which is another reason why they knew that like the state would never kind of concede to any of these demands, because whilst the Morcha was happening, the government was preparing to, like, you know, planning months in advance, like this military offensive.
Yeah, to be fair, both sides were like
preparing.
You know, yeah, both sides were preparing.
Like
they
bluff on both sides.
It was literally a chess game. They wanted to see if the Sikhs would back down, and
First, yeah.
the Sikhs wanted to back the government down, and the government's like, we're never going to back down. Like they weren't going to back down. So both sides are preparing militarily and tactically. So Sikhs had been fortifying positions within Darbar Sahib, securing strategic positions like on the water towers, you know, in the Sarai, not in the Sarai, in like strategic locations around the Darbar Sahib complex. And at the same time, you know, there's a full-on military, you know, cordon, like tens of thousands of soldiers had been put into Punjab. They were fortifying positions, trying to get closer and closer to Darbar Sahib. The Sikh regiments were moved strategically outside of Punjab in preparation for this. You know, so there was like multiple things that were happening at that time.
And one of the reasons they did that as well, because there was intelligence on the Indian side that a lot of the soldiers that were like on leave and going to Punjab, they were coming back and fully kind of, sympathetic to the movement. So they already knew that jadon koi gal hoyi, that it's going to cause a problem on that side.
And I think while we talk about the fortification of Darbar Sahib, I think we need to give a lot of credit to Shabeg Singh as well. I mean, his name, we say it's Shabeg Singh, but it's actually Shabeg Singh.
Yeah.
And Shabeg Singh, now, he's not a normal officer. He's the one who's actually won Bangladesh, who's actually helped them surrender. So basically there was...
Including June, he had fought in every battle the Indian army had fought.
And he had trained the Mukti Bani,
and
they did commit atrocities. So, like General Shabeg Singh's role in the Indian military isn't something that we should celebrate technically, because Sikh soldiers were used by multiple different forces to carry out atrocities in multiple different theatres of war, which is inherited from the colonizers, where, we were talking about in one of the previous episodes of fighting against each other. So you got Sikh faces of Indian occupation in Kashmir, in Bangladesh, because they were, again, they were fighting for their liberation. Where General Shabeg Singh, although Sikh bane there, when they leave the party force and they join the asal, Sachi Sarkar di Fauj party.
And how they left the party Fauj, basically he was dismissed just before he would reach the age of retirement and will receive pension. So he's dismissed with some wrong allegation on him that he did some chori or something from the canteen or something. Such a decorative officer.
A day before his
They
retirement.
dismissed him wrongly, and then that's not the only thing. I'll just like to mention one more thing, which is back in 82 there was Asian Games going on. And on the way to Asian Games,
that's when the armed Sikh realized their position.
Exactly, because there was this Dharam Yudh Morcha going on, and then Asian Games. Longowal from the stage of Dharam Yudh Morcha said that we're going to actually come to Delhi, all the Sikhs, and disrupt the Asian Games. So basically what they did was they sealed the whole Punjab, so nobody from Punjab can actually go to Delhi for Asian Games or anything. And they even, they strip search General Arora, who actually was sitting on that table to sign the surrender of the Bangladeshi, the Pakistani forces in Bangladesh. So he was the one, and his subordinate was General Shabeg Singh.
So a lot of these are loyal civilians.
Very, very loyal civilians. So these are like, you can be the most decorative officer within the Indian community, but then they will, if you're a Sikh, you will still get the backlash, no matter what.
We see that in November when is it Zail Singh's car? Zail Singh's car gets attacked.
I mean, when we talk about the genocide episode, we'll talk about that. But even being a serving president of the country and the head of the armed forces, he knew nothing about this attack, and his phone line was cut down in November 1984 genocide, and he's president. So I'm just trying to diminish this attitude, saying, "Na, eh dej kuch nahi rakhya, padho likho, afsar bano, you'll change your destiny." President to utte to tusi kuch nahi lag joge, you'll still they'll still stone you for being a Sikh. So that's what we need to realize, and that's what I think Sant Ji helped us realize, that no matter what you do, being a Sikh, you'll ever be a second-class citizen.
So yeah, 100%. And then so all of this tension and all this conflict that had been building, June 1st, you see the actual Jiri Morche Bandi and Tiari and this, this underlying conflict, it takes form, physical form. So you have 70,000 troops being inserted into Punjab, 10,000 Indian army soldiers surrounding Darbar Sahib. And most of these troops were non-Punjabis, like Bihari regiments, Madhya Pradesh, Uttara Pradesh, etc. And this represents the unchecked aggression. The hunta shaream hogi is naked aggression, as they would say, it's clear. So in that moment, so on June 1st, the Indian state makes the first attack. So on June 1st, the Border Security Force, the CRPF, the Central Reserve Police Force, under orders of the army, they start firing into the Darbar Sahib complex. And this is unprovoked firing that they do. And they do it in order to test where the Sikh battle positions are. So they start firing into the complex like Shaream, not at a target, just into the complex, and they fire into the Sangat, and 8 people are killed, 8 civilians of the Sangat that aren't part of this thing. And the Sikh soldiers are under strict orders to not respond to the fire from the Indian side unless their position, their morcha, the fortified position that they're in, unless that position's directly under fire, then you can respond. And so on 1st of June, Bhai Mehnga Singh, Bhai Kulwant Singh Babbar, Bhai Mehnga Singh, they, from Baba Atal Rai, they returned fire at an Indian government position. And then in that exchange of fire, they attained Shaheedi, and they become the first Shaheed of the battle that's going to unfold over the next 10 days.
One thing's inspiring as well is like, as the Shaheeds were talking about, like how the troops had gathered and like they were bringing all these troops in, we were as well. So there's one Sakhi of when Sant Ji goes to Hazur Sahib and he meets the like a jatha of Singhs that were doing Kaar Seva, and because they're doing Kaar Seva, they were quite like muscular, quite built. And Sant Ji says to them that like, you've built quite impressive physiques. Are these ever going to come in service of the Panth? And their Jathadar said that Sant Ji goes, yaad karo, remember us when you need it. He goes, "Assi tode agge to ho ke shaheediyan pawange."
So Kaar Seva Baba Shisha Singh Ji jatha.
Yeah.
And then they make their ways down to the.
So you can just imagine this kind of like, imagine how this kind of like would have felt, the atmosphere that in December 83, this Jatha of 40 Singhs that no one's ever seen before, no one knows. The Jatha of 40 Singhs comes down. And their specific thing is some of the Singhs express some paranoia because they don't know who they are, and they've come with like old kind of rifles and shotguns, and they've come with that, and they're saying if you see naal saath dena hai aisi, so when they kind of tell Sant Ji this is their position, like what should we do in it, because they could be anyone, and this was a little bit element of paranoia, and Sant Ji goes nahi ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਪਾਉਣਾ ਆ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਧੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਵਧੀਆ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਦਿਓ. I remember speaking to one of the Singhs who said that when they came, they just gave out whatever shaster they had, they shared them. And I said, like, so you just gave whatever other weapons you guys had to these 40 Singhs you'd never met before? And he goes, if you saw them, he goes, you would have given them too. He goes, they just spoke to each other in like Gurbani and stuff. Right. They were just at Simran the whole time, that they literally had come there, and their sole mission was with the Jewish Kashmir. And I think that's worth mentioning here. Is Kaar Seva Baba Shisha Singh Ji, there's Kaar Seva Khadur Sahib, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਆਏ. There's a few Kaar Seva Sants, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਆਏ. And of course we know that the Kaar Seva Sants helped also when ਹੁਣ ਜਦੋਂ ਤਿਆਰੀ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ their trucks would get in and out, from on the Kaar Seva ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗੱਡੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ. So there is a lot of people at play here already. It's not just Sant Ji and the Jathebandiyya that we know about already. Other people are now entering this space. Few Nihangdals here as well, that have entered this space as well.
Just, with the first you spoke of by Mehnga Singh Ji's Shaheedi, that was at Baba Atal Ji's Asthan. Can you just go into a little bit more detail? Because I feel this is the stage now where we can go into detail from June 1st to 10th. And you said that you good kid, but you just go covering so much detail. So it's an open platform just to literally, because I feel like good kid, but because you guys are definitely this space a bit more when it comes to these topics. I feel like for the armed Sangat that don't really get involved in this or hear about this a lot, especially at the basic Sangat, these small details will mean so much more as well. So Binti, if you can even just go into that detail and not miss these things out, that'd be great.
Why don't I do like mota whenever you guys want to jump in more detail?
I think for about Bhai Mehnga Singh, shall I just continue?
100%.
Please. So Bhai Mehnga Singh, we need to kind of dwell into his Jeevan a bit, Maharaj has given him the honor of to being the first Shaheed of this Hamla. And he's not just a normal Singh. He's the one who actually did some Sangat, I think, with the Bhai Fauja Singh. But then he attained Amrit after the Fauja Singh got Shaheed. So he basically ran towards Amritsar once he knew this has happened, and he took Amrit 79. And after that, he was along with the Babbar Singhs, with that whole lot. And when he got shot, I think Bhai Manmohan Singh was with him, and he just, Bhai Manmohan Singh said, ki hoya, theek hai? Kanda chaddi kala, goli lag chuki hai. And he goes, chaddi kala. And I think he recited the whole Sukhuni Sahib. So this is, and Maharaj, when we talked about, Murda hoye murid soye ko urla gur gor samave. He had the blessing of Guru that he was one of the Singhs actually cremated in the Darbar Sahib after, I think it was after 100 years or something. So it's one of those things that all these Singhs, they played a part. And then Bhai Mehnga Singh became one of the very inspiring figures for the rest of the Babbar Singhs. Of course. That hun ithon ardas karke gaye sige, and we'll reach that anyway afterwards. I don't want to steal your thunder.
No, not at all. Not at all. The Sathi Singhs of Bhai Mehnga Singh, they say that Bhai Mehnga Singh like had this like real deep desire for like Shaheedi, and every time they would do ardas, like their ardas would be really emotional and would reflect that emotion, that desire that they had for Shaheedi. Like ਪੈਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਪੱਬਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਖੜ ਕੇ like ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਈ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, like ਕਦੋਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਦਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਆਉਣਾ ਆ, like ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹ ਸੀਗਾ. And you see that like throughout all of the Sikhs that are fighting in Darbar Sahib, they're fighting, the Singhs that are fighting, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹ ਆ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਦਾ, like ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵਿਆਉਣ ਚੱਲੇ ਆ, like ਮੌਤ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਆਉਣ ਚੱਲੇ ਆ, like all of that ਇਤਿਹਾਸ of the Gur ਇਤਿਹਾਸ period of everything up before then, that ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਦੁਹਰਾਇਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ. You see it like being repeated in that moment, in the character of the and the way in which Sikhs are fighting and what they're fighting for. And on the other hand, you have the Indian state, whose violence, because ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਵੀ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਹੈ, ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਵੀ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਹੈ, right? The Indian state using their ਹਥਿਆਰ, whether it's physical weaponry or like the political thing, their violence looks like stripping women naked, cutting Singhs' gears off, spitting tamakku in their mouths, torturing people, killing them in encounters, firing into the Sangat. And Singhada violence looks like a targeted assassination of a senior police officer who's responsible, another assassination of another political figure who's responsible. So there's a massive difference in the character of and the nature of Sikh conflict versus the Indian state, and we're going to see that all play out in Darbar Sahib.
And with Bhai Mehnga Singh as well, what's amazing is that there's photos of his sanskar, and on the 2nd of June there was a lull in the kind of in the fighting, and his sanskar can happen, and his family were called immediately to say like another sanskar hone laga, and his mataji, this picture of it, and she's fully serene. And then what she says is when she like touches his head, and she says like what you've always done ardas for is you've been granted. So she wasn't upset either. She was like, how can I be upset when this is what you always wanted?
And and at this time now, like the Akaali Dal hasn't like kind of retreated from the battlefield, because they weren't prepared for this conflict, because their politics or their vision of like conflict or being a Sikh didn't really allow for it to get to that point. So we Naliya, like you see, Longowal in like the funeral pictures, etc., because they weren't ona kol koi tiyari nahi sigi, versus like the people on the the Khalsa Fauj side, ona di puri tiyari si, hathiyar vi sage, morche vi kitte hoye sage, so they were ready to enter into that conflict. So on the 2nd of June, which is Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shaheedi Purb, so there's 10,000 soldiers surrounding Darbar Sahib, like Amritsar, and there's all like military checkpoints everywhere, everything's lock off. That cordon is suddenly opened, and Sangat's allowed to filter into Darbar Sahib on the Shaheedi Purb. Mehnga Singh's Antam Saskar happens in Darbar Sahib in the Parkarma, and then on that day General Bra says that we'll see to it that these that they are on their knees in 2 hours. So that's that kind of attitude that they're going in with. And at the same time, the telephone, electricity, water connections are cut off in Darbar Sahib. The government essentially cuts off the entire Punjab state to the outside world. There's no like transport, there's like no media. All of that's kind of fully restricted. And then Indira Gandhi makes an appeal on national TV, and she says, I appeal, don't shed blood, shed hatred. So in what she's doing there is playing Jankya Niti. So in that equation, we are the violent people that are, spilling blood for no reason. And she is the calm person who's appealing for peace, knowing full well, like, they had been preparing for a year, commando raids, they'd sealed all of Darbar Sahib. They knew that they're bringing in soldiers from outside. Later on, they would give these soldiers rewards for participating in, this so-called operation.
So they've just fired indiscriminately into Darbar Sahib.
But she knows that it's been...
And we're shedding blood.
But she knows it's like a full media blackout, so no one would have known what was happening at that time.
Yeah.
And then there were trains being brought in, the Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shaheedi
Sangat that was there was allowed to come into Darbar Sahib. So purpose, because again, they wanted this to be a punishing, crushing, demoralizing defeat for the Sikhs. They wanted to inflict atrocities and violence in order to punish us, because that's the purpose of the state's violence, is to remind you who's in charge. And ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਇੰਨੀ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੂਜਾ ਅਕਾਲ ਕੀ ਪਰਚਾ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਕਾ ਦੀਦਾਰ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਕਾ. So they wanted to remind us the state's in charge, that you have no nata with Akaal Purkh. Akaal Purkh doesn't come into this relationship ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਗਰਿਕ ਆ, and because you are citizens, we're going to treat you the way we see fit. So if we want to destroy your bodies, if you want to burn your Gurdwara, if we want to make insightful speeches and, you know, incite these, you know, right-wing, like, you know, fascist Hindu organizations to carry out the unofficial work of the state, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ. And so that's what happens. And then on the 3rd of June, the Khalsa's Morcha Bandi at this point, they're in elevated positions around the Parkarma, Sant Jarnail Singh. So the military commander of the Khalsa Fauj is General Shabeg Singh, and they lead the defense of Akaal Takhat Sahib. So they knew at that point, the attack, the main attack is going to be coming. That was just like them testing, and all their fortifications were in all of the strategic locations as mentioned, including like Akaal Takhat Sahib, Darshani Diori, which is the entrance into Darbar Sahib, around the Parkarma, Ramgariya Bunga, the water tank, Guru Ramdas Sarai, Teja Singh Samundari Hall. They've got vantage points, they've got their own communication lines, they've got rations, food, etc. stored up, they've got ammunition stored up. And so
just a little point at this point as well, just to dispel this myth about, you know, this being like a place of worship, but for Sikhs, as Shamsher was talking about earlier, it's like it's also a killer. Part of the reason why, as we'll talk about later, that why the army struggled so much and why they had such a huge casualty rate was because the Darbar Sahib was built with that in mind. You know, like the Ramgariya Bunga, like the army talks about this, and they say, "Oh, why don't you try like a surprise action and try to like catch them off guard?" And they're like, "Because you could see us from miles off, innit? They've got watchtowers. Like the Ramgariya Bunga were made for that particular reason, and like even the narrow lanes that used to come up, I think they widened them now, but before there were narrow lanes that came up to the Darbar Sahib. So from when the Darbar Sahib was built, it was built so that, you know, you'd see the occupying force coming, and that's another problem that they had, that when the forces were trying to get to even the Darbar Sahib, they were getting picked off.
You know, you talk about that's basically the architecture. The way it's being built. And that's on the Sikh side, the Khalsa side. But you know, on the other side, the Indian Army, was it just the Indian Army? I've heard about like SAS involvement, British.
100%.
Is that involved as well?
Yeah, so they were working with, so the SAS was giving them training in order to carry out commando raids, and they were doing that because the British government wanted to sell them helicopters, military helicopters. They wanted to secure a trade deal on these on military hardware. And even before that, I mean, like Britain, and even, you know, after that, Britain has been a major supplier to India for military hardware, knowing, like, you know, what they use it for, the mass human rights atrocities that they carry out. So they also received help from like the Israeli Mossad, in order to carry out these kind of attacks. And it wasn't just the military, as the Border Security Force, the Central Reserve Police Force, multiple branches of the Indian state's security forces that were coming in. They had armored personnel carriers, they had tanks, the Vijantiya, like main battle tanks that they were brought in. And so the battle tanks, you got to understand, they come in because they weren't able to win a ground conflict. They weren't able to gain any ground into the Darbar side. Like they were sending soldiers in, like from the 3rd. So what happens on the 3rd is, on the 3rd, General Shabeg Singh gives the order to the Sikhs to engage in, to open fire. He's in the Parkarma, and he fires he's got a Sten gun. He fires a burst of his gun from the Parkarma, and that's the signal to the Singhs, like, apniya banduka khol do, and now begin the
in response
phase,
to artillery.
Begin the phase of the jung. And so, like, immediately on the 3rd of June, the Indian army, they take heavy losses. They're unable to gain in any ground into Darbar Sahib. They're coming from multiple entrances. They call in for like reinforcements. Their soldiers are like, some of them are deserting. Their helicopter gunships come in to drop elite troops and like commandos, and they're met with fierce resistance, which prevents any of those troops from landing. All of those helicopters troops are eliminated. And at this point, 3rd of June, the battle's gone way further than the Indians were anticipating, that they didn't know that the battle was going to go to this point now. It's like the Heru encounter, exploded, and they find like Sikh resistance at this point, like overwhelming.
And one of their generals, I forgot his name, talks about it being a killing field in front of Akaal Takhat Sahib.
Yeah.
So essentially they're getting drawn into the, you know, the bit in front of Akaal Takhat Sahib, Darshani
The
Diodi.
courtyard, yeah.
Yeah, that part, they're being drawn in.
They
and
have,
being
at this point, they
ambushed
haven't even.
every time when that's coming up.
Even
Yeah, at this point, they don't. At this point, they haven't had darshan of Akaal Takhat yet. They're still trying to come into like the complex, and they're worried as well. At the same time, they're worried about like a revolt from like other Sikh soldiers. They're worried about like more Sikhs coming from Punjab to Darbar Sahib. So they're worried that they're surrounded. Darbar Sahib and Amritsar, they're worried that they're going to get surrounded by like, you know, villages and, you know, people coming from towns and cities. So, you know, all the bus rail, like, you know, all of this, the road checkpoints and the blockades are put in place. The border with Gurdaspur is sealed. The border with like Pakistan is fully sealed. With Kashmir, like it's much larger than immediately Darbar Sahib. And like, yeah, the media blackout like intensifies to, you know, prevent any kind of information getting out at this point. So that the fighting continues throughout the 3rd. And then on the 4th of June at 4 a.m. they start. So at like, you know, 4 a.m. Amrit Vela Hundaya, like 3:30 in the morning, Sangat Sukhmani Sahib kar rahe. So at about 4 o'clock, the army suddenly begin bombing Darbar Sahib using artillery because they're unable to gain ground right with the soldiers. You have helicopters circling. They're starting firing from the helicopters. The helicopters are using like, you know, lights to like guide in like, you know, their soldiers.
What's interesting as well is that at the same time, like the Maryada doesn't stop.
Yeah.
So like, you know, the Singhs are still reading
us.
Asa Diwar, and at this time when the Torps fire, General Shabeg Singh is coming back from Darbar Sahib after doing Palki Seva. So like they still continue. And they're talking about the helicopter gunships. There's like a famous Saki of how Bhai Amrik Singh takes they're trying to like deliver troops and stuff, and Bhai Amrik Singh takes the SLR and like, you know, stops that advance from happening as well.
Yeah, so you have like 7 divisions of the Indian Army deployed at this point through all 3 branches: the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. And they're under immense political pressure now as well, because this is on June 4th now. Remember, like at the start, you know, the general in charge of it saying that this is going to be over in 2 hours, that they're going to be on their knees. So like 4 days later now, like, you know, there's intense firing. They're losing like a massive number of soldiers. General Shabeg Singh had set up firing positions that were like, you know, a few inches off the ground in order to wound the Indian soldiers, and then wait for, you know, other soldiers to come and pick, because he knew like the protocols of the Indian army, so that he was like, shoot to wound them, and then 2-3 more are going to come to take that soldier, and then get all of them together. So their like casualties were piling up massively, and they weren't kind of prepared. There's a video of an Indian army lieutenant, and he says, when we kind of come in to like, you know, under one of the entrances to get into the Parkarma, he's like, we're being fired from above, underneath, from behind. And he's like, we're being fired at from all angles, and we don't know where these positions are. We can't see anything. Like there's like all this tua, etc. And he's like, at this type of training, you know, they haven't prepared us for this. They haven't given us this type of training to kind of meet this type of fortifications. So that's when they start like, you know, under like, you know, political pressure, under obviously the growing threat of revolt from like Punjab. Indian forces start using heavy artillery. They're requesting support for main battle tanks. And they had around like, you know, at this point now, they got like about 15,000 soldiers for this main assault. They got heavy weapons. They've got like complete provisions. They've got additional 35,000 soldiers in reserve. And the Khalsa Fauj at this point is like less than 300. Water supply has been cut off, and like they're thriving off like, you know, punne hoye shole and like, you know, Guru's Kirpa and the Ardasa.
I always find this bit quite astounding, is that like Shamsher Singh was saying, that they had like unlimited resources. So like their battalions, and they've got like infantry regiments, and they're getting replenished time and time again. There's wave after wave of attack is getting met. And the crazy thing is that whether you look at like the Babbar Khalsa Singhs at the Guru Nanak Nawaz, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮੋਰਚਾ ਬੰਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ at the water tanki,
the tank Morcha,
and the crazy thing is, but ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹਦਾ ਮੋਰਚਾ ਬੰਦੀ was 2 Singhs. Like each morcha, like one of the ek do Singhs here, and the difference was, it's not necessarily just tactical. Like General Shabeg Singh was definitely tactically amazing, and like, you know, and the infrastructure of Darbar Sahib had been created in that sense, where there's tunnels and all sorts of things for the same reason. But it's also about like the bravery of the fighters, because they'd been told, like, imagine Sant Ji or someone had told them, like, or whichever group it was, I said that this is your morcha, like, and you're not gonna, like, you're not leaving unless they walk over your chest, innit? So that's the difference.
At 10 p.m. on June the 5th, like the battle, like, is raging, like, throughout the day. But it's at 10 p.m. when like 13 tanks, like armored personnel carriers.
Sorry, there's one other thing, and towards the end of 4th of June as well, like there's this Dr. Bhagwan Singh, he's a Sikh Student Federation leader, and he's still alive today. And he was talking about the attack, the battle, and he clearly wasn't like of the same kind of caliber of these other Guru Sikhs, because he was saying that when the battle started, General Shabeg Singh had said early on the 4th that, this is the perfect place to give Shaheedi as a soldier because it has a place connected to your Dharam and your ancestry and your people. And he goes, that's when I realized that he was ready to die and I wasn't. And then later on the 4th, he goes that because obviously he's a PhD student, so he's like studied like Sikh history in depth. And what he was saying was that what we couldn't believe was happening is what we've been reading about was happening before our eyes. Because when they got to Akaal Takhat on the 4th of June, he goes, Sant Ji was handing out do tare khande and was saying to the Singhs, Singho je asla mukega de khanda kharka deo, but kisne hath nahi kare. And he goes, I'm standing there thinking like, I can't believe what I'm watching. This is the kind of history that we've read about, and it's happening in front of our eyes.
Yeah. And like this, the just like the mahal from like the Singhs that were inside the Darbar Sahib, they're talking about like Sant Jarnail Singh's older brother putting on a brand new chola, new kamar kasa, new dastar, like ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹ ਸੀਗਾ, like ਕਿ ਉਹ ਵਿਆਹ ਤੇ ਚੱਲੇ ਆ, like ਮੌਤ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਆਹਣ ਚੱਲੇ, they're going to marry death. You had other Singhs that were they were writing their names and they were putting them inside the golak in Darbar Sahib so that like Sikhs, future generations would know who made a stand here, who fought here. They were like the environment was one of like Chardi Kala, that we are gonna meet these the Indian army like kind of head on.
So Baba Gurdwara Singh Ji, like before, like when I think it was the Afghan forces were going to attack Darbar Sahib, and they decided that they had the permission to stay behind with their 30 Singhs, and those 30 Singhs, they all got dressed up in like wedding clothes and like all their best busted and stuff, name gatre, because we can see mauth no viana, and that all same jidda itihas hai Singhan ne daraya. See that the same way Shamsher was talking about, that they all put on, like Sant Ji put on a new like jola, the star, and then you tell Saki about Mukta as well.
Yeah, by Hachan Singh Mukta like puts a balti on his head, steel balti, because he was like, when the bullets come, like they'll telka jaogiyan, like they'll deflect off the balti, and he didn't want his chehra to become bepashan. He didn't want to become unrecognizable from his face, because he wanted people to know that Harchan Singh Mukta aithe larke shaheed hoya siga. So like that kind of spirit. So on like June 5th, the Indian military is like starting to bring in like heavy artillery, and like by the evening the Indian armies like plan, like this larger plan is set into motion, and Gurdwara across Punjab, up to 74 Gurdwara now that we know. At the time, it was like a few years ago when we kind of started looking into this at the we kind of knew about 38 Gurdwara, but now like things that I've done research into this of like a list of like 74 Gurdwara.
As far as like Gurdwara Dukh Nivaran Sahib,
Patiala, Ropar, Chonk, Mehta, Faridkot, Muxar Sahib, Mogga. And they were attacked away from Darbar Sahib, and that's because they were strongholds for Panthic organizing, and again like the role of the Gurdwara has always been that it's always been a kender ke jithe Sikh katthe hunde and they organize, they think about their future, they deliberate on these issues.
Just to highlight that point, you're saying at the same time of June 1984, at least to today's current count, 74 other Gurdwara were attacked at the same time. Yeah, including
Baba Gurbachan Singh Soni's pins of like main Singhs, like tanks were sent at some of these Gurdwara as well. Yeah, like full on like assaults, like
because this had gone like the uprising is bigger than Sant Ji now, right? Like because the Sangat is already like that they knew.
It was like they accelerated their plan almost, because like by June 5th now you're 5 days into an operation that they thought that was going to last like 2 hours, and they're meeting like massive like resistance. They're suffering a huge number of casualties. They're not even able to get into the Parkarma. Like 5 days, they're not able to gain ground and build a position within the Parkarma. Anytime they come close, they're met with fire from below, from above, from like different vantage points. And like there's underground passages around the Parkarma, fortified positions. are used really effectively, and the fighting continues like all the way into the night. I think General Shabeg Singh becomes Shaheed on the 5th of June as well at the evening. Their bodies taken to Sant Jarnail Singh, and then they say to Sant Jarnail Singh that they collect the bachan pure kar gaya, like Shaheed bhi ho gaya, and I didn't leave my weapon on the battlefield. I died like with
gun back.
Yeah, he brought his gun back. He's like, I died with my shaster in my hand. So early into like the 6th of June, the battle's intensity increases, but yet the Indian forces, they're unable to penetrate the defenses of Sri Akaal Takhat Sahib. They're getting closer, so wave after wave is like being repelled and they're being decimated.
And things are coming lower from like the vantage points. The water has been taken out, the Bungia are getting shelled, so the Singhs are now like regrouping, getting closer and closer. So now, especially the Kaar Seva wale Singhs, the Federation Singhs like Bhai Amritsar Singh, they're like holy like getting consolidating. Obviously Shaheedi bhi ho rahi hain. So now they kind of one of the things was saying that like we were fighting and our hearts had become stone, because like Sade Singh, Sade Sam Nature that Shaheed always see, and they were just like Shaheed next to us like lying, and we just, but at this point like and even like the army that talked about it, and they said that like when they finally got in, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but when they finally got into Akaal Takht, they said the shells were knee deep. And they said that there's no battle where you have ever fought where you could fight like that. Like how a small number of people can fight like that. It's just beyond.
And it's like the month of June, you're like full on, like one of the hottest months, and you're firing like machine guns and like the heat that they're producing, and you're firing non-stop. Yeah, like they afterwards, like the Indian military guys, they couldn't work out how the Sikhs were like 126 were able to fire that number of bullets from that position, because that requires an intense continuous firing that requires like skill and training, like loading weapons and in order to continue like that sustained rate of fire. Basically they couldn't understand like so you now on the early hours of 6 June you have like armored personnel carriers, which are like vehicles that allow soldiers to get in closer. They're brought in directly into the Parakarma in order for them to like kind of advance their assault. And they go around like Baba Deep Singh Shaheedi Memorial, and the Sikhs fire an RPG at that armored personnel carrier, and it wasn't like a commercial RPG. This is like a thing that they had made, because within Darbar Sahib they had a factory for making like explosives and stuff. So they had fired a rocket at that armored personnel carrier and exploded it. And you could hear like obviously things doing Jagare like on the 6th of June, and then the Indian military sends in highly trained like paramilitary troops and other like battalions in order to get close to Akaal Takhat Sahib, and even those waves of like commandos are like decimated. So unable to kind of gain ground, unable to like defeat like those Morcha positions in like these pitched kind of battles where it's like soldier versus soldier, or like firing from machine guns on armored personnel carriers. This is when they bring in the tanks to essentially blow up the whole battlefield, because they couldn't secure. They see like, oh, firing's coming from that building. It's not like, oh, now soldiers versus soldiers. Now they just like fire a tank shell at that, blow that up. And that's how they were finally able to gain control. And the shells that they use, they're called high explosive squash head shells. They're designed to be used against fortified targets. So they go through the wall and they penetrate the wall and they explode inside. So they're designed, they're like highly effective munitions that they're using.
And approximately 70 to 80 shells were used
at Akaal Takhat alone, and that's from Jagjit Arora, who's like an Indian military guy. He looks at like Akaal Takhat afterwards, and he's like, he thinks around like 80 high explosive shells are fired. And talking about the architecture, the first kind of shells they were firing at the Gummat of Akaal Takhat were bouncing off, because it was like so thick.
They fired an artillery Akaal Gustav round, and the army, I think his name is Izrar Khan, was saying that because it bounced off like it was a 303. Like it bounced off as like as if it was a minor shell from a rifle, because that's how amazing like the Akaal Takht was.
How does the Sakya of like Bibi Vaheguru Kaur, Satnam Kaur, if that's their names, how does that fit into this as well? Was that at the same time?
The Giani Mohar Singh's Parwar, and Giani Mohar Singh was in a Morcha. Giani Mohar Singh as in a Morcha in one of the like underneath one of the gummats, I think. And then in one of those gummats there's like Pratan Swaroops and stuff that was stored there. It's like, just I'll get to that point in a second. But a shell hits that gummat and it like catches fire, and then he leaves that Morcha, swims through the Sarovar, goes to Sant Ji and says, they've hit around there, and it's like the gummat's on fire now. And Sant Ji is like angry at him. He's like, why did you leave your like position? Go back to your position. But just like, you know, like how strict they were and like their discipline on the battlefield. And the whole Parvar, Giani Mohar Singh, their Singhni, Bibi Satnam Kaur, Bibi Waheguru Kaur, their bachche become Shaheed. They become Shaheed during their attempt to destroy an Indian army tank. And in that, like, oh, bachche, the, you know, paisa Shaheed ho jande hai. Yeah, that happens on, I think that happens on like the 5th, 6th of June. Yeah. And so, on like the 6th of June, the Sant Jarnail Singh, towards the evening, the fighting's going really late at night. Like jere Akaal Takhat de vich Singh sage, like the last kind of defenders, because now the fighting had come close, the tanks had come to Akaal Takhat right in front of it. The Sarovar and everything's all lal, and like it's all like blood everywhere. And like at that moment, like they make their final stand essentially, and they come out of Akaal Takhat firing. Or Ardas karde hai pehla, sorry, Waheguru. So like when the tanks are now outside Akaal Takhat Sahib, there's like, you know, yeah, there's like the Akaal Takhat's damage. Sant Jarnail Singh Huni and like the things go up, and they do Ardas in front of the Shastran di Palki, and they do Ardas to Guru Har Gobind Pasha, and they say that you know, ਜਦੋਂ ਤੱਕ ਸਿੱਖ ਦਾ ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਕਰ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਵਾਰ-ਵਾਰ ਜਨਮ ਲਵਾਂ. And like at the same time, like there's Singhs firing with their machine guns from Akaal Takhat while they're doing their ardas. So ardas karke ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲਦੇ ਆ under the, like, you know, the lower level of Akaal Takhat, and like her tank fires at them, and ਉਹ ਫਿਰ ਉੱਥੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ. So by the morning of 7th June, so on the 6th of June as well, ਹਾਂਜੀ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ.
And I think at the same time, you know, before Sant Ji attained Shaheedi, he did give that message to the other Singhs, especially the Shabeg Singh Babbar and the other Singh, Anok Singh Babbar, who are still alive. And he said that कि किसे नू ये लड़ाई मुड़ के जारी रखनी पैनी. So, you know, if you're safe by now, you need to go ahead and carry on the Sangharsh. And in the meanwhile, obviously, as he mota, you know, because the time is not there, you know. But there were a lot going on, you know, like, for example, there was Langar Seva going on. Ranjit Singh Babbar was walking through the tunnels giving Langar. Bhai Nok Singh Ji Babbar was escorting some Sangat out.
Yes.
Slowly and steadily through the back door. कि तुसी बच के निकल जाओ, है ना? Because they're gonna eventually kill everyone, saying कि असी maximum casualty चाहने हैं. And the choice of that day as well, Gurpurab, you know, the only reason for that is to maximum casualty.
It's maximum casualty, but also imagine how difficult that would have been, because by Anok Singh Ji's like ferrying out Sangatna whilst also trying to fight and trying. Obviously, we would obviously discriminate between obviously the Sangatna and the army, but the army's not doing that, so it was just added difficulty.
And they're fighting. I was actually going to cover that as well. Like the Singh's order is to fight until like their last bullet, and until that fighting and that Morcha is not sustainable. And then, you know, some of the Singhs that leave the battlefield after that point, they leave with that intention, doing ardas ke assi itthe shaheed ho gaye hain, tell our parvar that we're never going to go back to our homes now, that assi mar gaye hain itthe, now we've become shaheed with the rest of the Sikhs, and they continue the fight afterwards. But on like the 6th of June, Brahma Chelni is like one of the only journalists, and Jaspal Singh, they're on a building like on the other side, and they're watching this whole thing happen. They're the only two journalists that are there. And so Brahma Chelni says like at 9 o'clock, the whole city of Amritsar is like, you know, put into darkness, 700,000 people, you know, there's a power outage. And he's like, then there's like an hour later, half an hour later, he's like, there's like shelling that's happening, mortar explosions, machine gun fire. And he sees like this, you know, big, you know, battle is now kind of taking place. Then he's like, there's tracer bullets, like bullets that are fired with like some light on them, so you can see where they're landing. You can see those in the sky. You can see like tracer flare. And then he's like, where they were, like the windows were like shaking. And like the radio station, the government-run radio station, the only communication that people were listening was saying that the city is calm, no need to worry, it's all okay, you know, everything's fine. And he says at 10:30, between 10:30 and midnight, he said he heard slogans from the outskirts of the city that villagers were trying to reach Darbar Sahib from different directions, and they heard, you know, slogans of long live the Sikh, you know, Dharam, Pindrawale, you know, Zindabad, etc. And he's like, each time we heard the slogans, then we heard like machine gun fire and like screams, and there's like a Dal Baba Bidhi Chand Singhs were trying to get to Darbar Sahib. They were fired at through with a helicopter, and those helicopter gunshots are taken out. And then so on the 6th, on the 7th of June is where like the last kind of fighters, those last Morche, are just left. There's only a handful of Morche that are left. And now the military is able to gain control of the majority of the Darbar Sahib complex. And what they do now is, like sometimes when we talk about June 84 and like, or 84 in general, we use the word Sikh genocide to describe the whole thing. And that's inaccurate. It doesn't do justice to the entire kind of ityas. It doesn't do justice to the battle. And it doesn't teach us much about our resistance. Like genocide is an important term, don't get me wrong. It's important because it helps us understand the nature and the scale of the violence from the Indian state. But what happens after June 7th, when the military finally is able to gain control of the compound, there's sarai there, if anyone's been there, like rooms where Sangat can stay and stuff. So there's Sangat that are in the sarai that have been there, some of them for like 4 or 5 days, that are trapped, that are dehydrated, that don't really have like, any kind of access. And so those Sangat then, they are the lot, and many of these are civilians, and they know that civilians had come in because the military's like surrounded the whole area, so they're unarmed as well. They're not part of like the battle that's been raging. So what the Indian soldiers do then is they start raping women within like the Darbar Sahib complex. They start indiscriminately killing Sikh civilians, including like children. They tie like Singhs' hands behind their backs with their dastara, and then they burn the secret reference library. We lose like handwritten grunts,
thousands of like
thousands of grunts and stuff, and then they start drinking inside Darbar Sahib. So they start drinking and smoking inside Darbar Sahib, and according to the notification from the Punjab government's Department for Taxation, Punjab government paid for, because the bill was then put onto the the Punjab's legislature. They paid for 700,000 quarter bottles of rum, 30,000 quart bottles of whiskey, 60,000 quart bottles of brandy, 160,000 bottles of beer, all for consumption by the armed forces personnel deployed in Operation Blue Star. And that's what they start doing when they gain control of the complex. And then obviously they use like poisonous gases. They throw grenades into the sarai. They they kill babies. Like my mom was telling me about my granddad who was there at Darbar Sahib, and he saw like the sarovar was like full of like blood, and he saw like babies' bodies all over the place. So you see like this like slaughter of civilians that's taking place now, like following Darbar Sahib's jung on like the 7th of June. And then essentially like immediately following that, so they're given kulli shutti to carry out atrocities, then they start cleaning up. Then they start like tidying the Darbar Sahib, they start dragging the bodies, they start like disposing of the evidence essentially, start cleaning the parkarma following at the same time.
Baaj interview fi deni si.
Yeah, we interview
famously was the body to say, because we went in with prayers on our lips.
Humility in our hearts.
Humility in our hearts.
That's what the general said. And he says, and he said, and they say like they say many lies. We can go into that as well because it's really important. But like there's a quote, from this guy called Gordon H. on the 6th, and he says bands of Sikh horsemen were seen riding at full gallop towards Amritsar, running the gauntlet of Muhammadian troops. The message would be sent round the distant villages: who will ride tonight? Death was a martyr's crown on such occasions. And he's talking about like Sikhs finding out like Darbar Sahib te hamla hoya, like utthe pahunchi hai. So you see like all of those like military regiments of Sikhs that we had talked about that were sent out into different areas like Assam, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh. They basically all tarmi fauji, like they abandoned their positions. Some of them shot their officers, and they started making their way to Darbar Sahib. And this would have like completely like flipped the scales of like the conflict. And so we're talking about around 5,000 Sikhs had deserted, like left, rebelled, committed a mutiny essentially, and the government tries to like suppress that revolt, that it never happened. They denied their pensions, etc. But the Panthas, give them that respect of Tarmi Fauji.
They were severely tortured, some of them.
They fought pitched battles.
They were court-martialed, because that's what happens if you refuse army orders. They were court-martialed. A lot of them then eventually fled outside India, and they do tell their story sometime that this is what happened. But I think that even in the very Darbar Sahib itself, the Pathi Singh was shot. Maharaj Swaroop was shot
Inside the Darbar
Darbar
Sahib.
Sahib.
Giani Mohar Singh.
Inside the Darbar Sahib, and I think they showed that Maharaj Swaroop as well.
Yeah.
There were bullet marks. I think there was about 3 or 4 bullets pierced into the Maharaj Swaroop. So they just didn't left anyone, you know.
The Kirtani Singh,
Kirtani Singh, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜਥਾ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ.
So the 8th and the 9th is, you see, like they're attacking civilians, from like 7th to all the way to the 9th. They're like, killing civilians, not just in Darbar Sahib but beyond as well, where protests are erupting. The news is spreading beyond Amritsar that this has happened. Mutinies are taking place, rebellions taking place. And on the 10th of June, the last fighters, Shaheed by Major Singh Nagoke, he becomes Shaheed, and their Jatha becomes Shaheed. And like famously, like they're told to surrender, like they're at the in a Morcha underneath one of the bunge, and they're told to surrender, and they reply like Ette Guru Gobind Singh Ji. They say their names. They say like Major Singh Nagoke, Baki de Jere Singh. Yeah, there are 4 Singhs in the basement of Ramgariya Bunga, and they start shooting at anybody that comes close. And then they say that, Aithe like Guru Gobind Singh Ji de Singh, like we're not going to surrender, like you guys surrender. And they like literally fought like right until the end.
They also fired up on Zail Singh, innit, when he came.
Yeah, they fired up on Zail Singh when they came.
Shot his bodyguard.
Yeah, and then from that point forward, like the Indian army goes into like this, the Indian government goes into this massive propaganda overdrive. They say in the Times of India in June 1984 that, quote, terrorists made a desperate attempt to blow up the Akaal Takhat, killed a number of men, women and children, and unsuccessfully tried to escape with huge amounts of cash, jewelry and other valuables after their leaders were killed in the action on June 5th. The Akaal Takhat was not damaged in the army action. So that's what they kind of go on, this massive
Times of India.
Yeah. And then they start the Indian army issue a circular in their magazine called Batjeet, and they say that some of our innocent countrymen were administered an oath in the name of religion, Amrit Shakya unhone ne, to support extremists and actively participated in the act of terrorism. These people wear a miniature kirpan around their neck and are called Amritaris. They have to be subdued to achieve the final aim of restoring peace in the country. Any knowledge of the Amritaris, who are dangerous people and committed to pledged to commit murder, arson and acts of terrorism, should be immediately brought to the notice of authorities. These people may appear harmless from the outside but are basically committed to terrorism. This is an internal magazine that circulated to Indian army officers. So they this whole battle happens. Khalsa ne jooj ke like shahidiyan paiyan, and then the Indian government then goes on this like tries to like kind of save face, tries to like demonize the Sikhs that are fighting.
Particularly Sant Ji, they like, there's I don't know if you have a reference for it, but like again we'll see some people in our Sadi community, Punjabi log kende Sant Ji ko utthe eh galat kam hunda si, oh galat kam hunda si, and I don't actually know where this comes from. I don't know if there is actually a source and reference. Sometimes it's harangi di gall hai, like Sant the pind that the Pindranali Jatha goes past utthe theke band ho jande si. And then this idea that there was something,
hashish and drugs,
drugs and women, jithe abusers utho pind nangda si Jatha Taksal da, and abusers will out Pindranali in town. And to put those kind of dosh on Sant Ji to like some sort of character assassination. So
and you know the funny thing about that, which I always found, is like it makes no sense. Like why does the Indian government care that they were drinking or like taking drugs? Like the Indian government's not like a teetotal thing, right? ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਧਰਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ? It was about attacking their Sikhi, that they weren't Sikh enough for you, and that was like a very strategic thing that they done. And you hear that like people that ਸਾਡੇ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ that that unfortunately don't know or have been convinced by like these propaganda narratives, because the state did a very effective job of spreading these. They say like, the all asli Sikh thoru sage, like that's not what Sikhi is, etc.
And it boils down to is if you take nothing away from this podcast, and apart from the plethora of information that these things have come from, what he's just said, that this idea that they weren't Sikh enough for you, there is no more Sikh than them. Sikhi, if ever achieved by anyone, is achieved by them.
Especially
that
in
away,
recent times. I mean, they were the so-called flag bearers of the Sangharsh and the Sikhi ideology. And what they did was, it's commendable, standing in front of one of the biggest armies on the face of the earth and just, doing their job to defend
There's
their
actually like
faith.
an Indian photographer, I think Raghurai, and he's like quite a famous photographer for photograph like Mother Teresa and etc. And he had the blessing of photoing Sant Ji as well. And he was asked like 30 years later that, who was the most amazing person you ever met? And he said it was Sant Ji and stuff. And he goes, I don't obviously agree with his aims and such, and etc. He goes, if you can stand in front of 10 divisions of like the Indian army firing like artillery with a tir in it, and have others stand with you, then there must be something about you.
In Pant Prakash, it always reminds me of this one line from Pant Prakash. Te same aise kehe ho Gobind Sharan Bichar, where Guru Gobind Singh Ji sees the Chote Sahibzade, Vadde Sahibzade like fight and attain Shaheedi on the battlefield in Chamkaur. Aj khas pe Khalsa Satguru ke darbar. That Guru Sahib sees them and is so happy, and he says that now aj Khalsa baneya, and they earned that darja, that position of being Khalsa in Satguru's darbar. And that's what you see in the Panth's memory of when the Panth looks at like what June 1984 was, like the Sakka that you've referred to continually. This connects us to our Sikh cosmology, and when we look back at our Ityas, is because this moment inspires Sikhs about how to understand what their relationship is with the dunya and how to exist in this dunya in the way of the Khalsa. And it teaches us that our Sangharsh isn't about a seat at the table or sharing power of these worldly powers. We want a new way of sitting all together on our terms. We want it rooted in our own system, our own Gurmat philosophy, and our own worldview. And this requires for us to look at those Shaheeds as the guiding light, that they are like, as Shaheed Bibi Bimal Kaur says when she refers to Sant Jarnail Singh and June 1984 their Shaheed, she says, Channan Munareya, that they're towers of light, they're lighthouses, that they guide us in, they teach us how to be Sikh in this moment. And Sant Jarnail Singh, through like their whole like kind of Jivan Di Kalna and like their kind of what they did, they leave like a lesson that like 40 years later, it teaches us more about ourselves and about being a Sikh and about the nature of power than any person alive today can claim to do. It doesn't matter what, jehde o marji odde de utte o pahunch gaye on a dunyavi level, like their teaching is so profound that 40 years later, people can't even talk about it. Like, people can't even express the gravity of what they were doing, with complete freedom, because it still falls into this realm of being a threat to the state. And I think that is a massive testament.
Absolutely. And I believe that's the compounding interest of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. 4 years on, and hale wo nahi hai, whether it's a Kisan Morcha 2 saal na pehla, there might be something else, some sort of other socio-economic issue, movement, jo marji hai. Sant Jarnail Singh is inserted back into the conversation, and we will do every time.
Yeah, no matter what the conflict is, what the issue is, it always comes back to Sant Ji and the other Singhs, who fought, whether it be Bhai Jatana, Bhai Sukhdev Singh Babbar, Bhai Fauja Singh, Sant Jarnail Singh Khalsa Pindrale, Bhai Amrik Singh. I mean, all these figures are like, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਮਾਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ, ਪਰ ਅਸਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਅਮਰ ਹੋ ਗਏ. In Sikh history,
they failed their objective. What they wanted to see was them like groveling defeat, to like surrender, and obviously what happened was totally different.
What happened was Guru Nanak Pasha's like prem di khed, like joto prem khelan ka chao, sir tar tali gali mariya, itmarg per tari je sir dije kaan na kije. That's what played out, and they like had the power to do all sorts of stuff, but reality is that ultimately the victory was of the Panth, because unhone juj ke shahadat diti and completely changed the destiny of and the trajectory of the Panth. Khalistan is the most serious topic. Wherever you have Sikhs in any country, and in the Indian state wants to engage in that country, Khalistan is the battleground that they will say, don't let them have Khalistan, whether you want it through a referendum, whether you want it through human rights advocacy, whether you want it through a movement, whatever. Like, to them, it's all the same. There's no challenge greater than Khalistan to India's national integrity and sovereignty, and it remains the most, like, the tip of Sant Ji's spear, the vanguard, the elite conversation. It revolves around Khalistan and Sangharshan, and it's because of all of their Shaheedi. And then obviously what follows, like, the thing is, it doesn't end in June 1984. We can't stress that enough. Like, within 2 years, the Khalsa Panth is reorganizing in the Sarbat Khalsa. They then Jajaru Jathebandiyan are out in the field. Now the conflict that was, they tried to contain to Darbar Sahib, now that conflict is spreading all over the place. And now you got like way more armed and organized Sikh military formations waging war that defies the principles of guerrilla warfare, because in order for guerrilla warfare to be successful, you need the terrain to give you advantage. You need like jungles, mountain cover, etc., etc.
This is where you see that
you have lowland in Punjab, and
This is where you see the vision of Sant Ji as well, because he has to make this stand there. Like Baba Gurbakh Singh and the 30 Singhs, the rest of the Panth had made the decision to move from there. But Baba Gurbakh Singh Ji knew that for Sikh Itihas, that it's part of our parampara, that we have to meet them. So Sant Ji has to make that stand. So when they have the communication with Babur Singh, the Babur Singh said that, listen, we can get you out. He says that, listen, that everyone else, now this battle has taken a different form. Now the tanks have come and Singhs are running out of arms and ammunition, that you guys need to continue the struggle. They have a really a heartfelt meeting at the 5th as well. But not just that, General Labh Singh Ji and Federation Singhs were able to leave and continue the struggle afterwards. But also,
were they able to leave? Sorry,
just because at the time before, all the infrastructure was inbuilt. So the buildings that were adjoining the Darbar Sahib complex, the Sangata, literally their houses adjoined it. So they went through those, and the Sangata gave them clothes, and they were able to come through.
Now remember, the Parikrama now has been spread backwards quite a bit, as in come outwards.
You can't imagine it today.
Yeah, architecture, they've changed the architecture.
So there's houses gulliyan all around, so you could probably hop from house to house.
But then there's a whole host of Guru Sikhs as well, like Baba Manachal, Avtar Singh Ji Brahma, even Bhai Manbir Singh Ji Chehru. Just before, Bhai Sahib was there throughout this whole period, and just before the attack, he sends Bhai Manbir Singh Chehru to his friend and says, "Tu tijake shabil karni hai Seva." And Bhai Manbir Singh is saying to say something that this build-up's happening, and you're sending me to the shabil, and he goes, "Tu seva karni hai," do what I'm saying, innit? And he's like, okay. So he goes there, and we had the great fortune of speaking to Mataji, Bhai Manbir Singh's Mataji, and she was saying that when the army action happens and they close the whole of Punjab off and no one can move, she goes that Bhai Manbir Singh, because if Sant Ji had told him what his plan was, he knew that Bhai Manbir Singh wasn't going to listen. So he gives him this kind of this kind of decoy plan to say, look, you have to go do shabil in your pind. He goes that, and Mataji says that Bhai Manbir Singh, उन्होंने जितना केस जो one of those सिर जो जितना inni jada he goes Santa ne tokka kita wana, he's betrayed me, he's taken me out of the battle and stuff. Because obviously at that point that Raat he didn't understand it. She was mutel chota ser and he was beside himself. But these are the things who Sant Ji had made sure that they were outside, because on another
they're lined up for the future,
phase 2.
Isn't it? Har ke sant batab humarg hum piche lag chali. Sant Ji has already kind of created the infrastructure. This is the same Bhai Manbir Singh who head up the Khalistan Commando Force, one of the largest guerrilla outfits, and that guerrilla outfit then would give training to and house people like Harjinder Singh Jinda, who would go on and actually achieve assassinations directly linked to the Akaal Takhat Hamla, directly linked to the Sikh genocide. I know, famously, this is the Manbir Singh Jahedu who so Sant Ji set him up for this, and General Labh Singh's there. General Labh Singh and Bhai Manbir Singh Jahedu eventually meet. It's funny stories. One of the kind of famous things everybody talks about when they talk about the Sangharsh is the bank robbery. The Ludhiana bank robbery, and there's a famous bit because Bhai Manbir Singh is said to be quite Gurmukh Sabha wali, and General Labh Singh says to him, you're the head of the Khalistan Commando Force, which as per the Vidan of Khalistan, which was created, is the Commando Force would serve as the nucleus of the Khalistan National Armed Force. So that was the darja, and it's funny, innit, how Sant Ji set it up, and And they say to Bhai Manveer Singh Chahedu, Kiwi, look, you're going to anybody jathebandi chaloni hai, paisa kinna? And I think, I can't remember the exact number, but it was like a really low amount of like rupees. And Manveer Singh Chahedu was like, paisa inna chaloni tusi Khalistan Commando Force, the nucleus of the armed force. And later on, they'd go and get $5.5 million and say, haan chalao Commando Force. And then thus the Sangharsh should go, है ना, जो ना तक से करा तक, है ना.
Gurbani says, "Mahapurkhan ka bolna, huwa kite par thai," है ना. There is something behind it.
Yeah.
But I think 3 other things I want to mention, the atrocities where Indian government has actually gone above and beyond, in enmity, is, there's this treaty of war that if you kill anybody on the opponent side, you need to return their bodies. They never did that in Darbar Sahib. They even categorized most of the armed Sangat as terrorists as well, when the white paper came eventually. And then the other thing that they did...
They took their bodies out in garbage trucks.
Garbage trucks, yeah, and dumped them and burned them or whatever they did with them.
You had to bribe the municipal workers with like sharab, and also that they could take the jewelry off the Sangat to get them to do that.
The other obnoxious thing that they did was actually raise the Indian flag on Akaal Takht, the Tateri Akaal Takht. You only do that to mark any enemy territory under your occupation. You will only do that to, when, for example, when they fought that Kargil Ladai on that peak 901, they took that back from Pakistan, they put the Indian flag back on. That's exactly what they did with Darbar Sahib. The other thing they did was all the underage kids, that they took them and actually booked them as potential terrorists.
18,000 prisoners that were taken into high security prisons. Like in what's that Mark Tully writes in his book, some of these were like 2-year-olds, like Jaspir Kaur in Ludhiana jail, 2 years old, Charanjit Kaur 4 years old, like little kids basically. And one of the CBI, like the Central Bureau of Investigation, and the IB, the Intelligence Bureau people, were asked questions about them. And the CBI guy said that, why aren't you showing any regard to like civil liberties? Like, these are little kids, and they say these are all fine ideas for newspapers and preachers. We had on our hands suspected terrorists and would-be terrorists. And they say like Jasbir Kaur, 4-year-old Rinku, whose father died during the army operation, whose mother has been missing since. And this is the list of infant terrorists, and they go through routine interrogation. And the level of atrocities that were committed, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਅੰਤ ਨਹੀਂ. But like one thing that I really want to stress is like Sant Jarnail Singh's legacy and the legacy of those Jujaru Singhs and Singhniyan ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਜੂਝ ਕੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਪਾਈਆਂ is not within the realm of law and order and human rights discourse. That's not their fight. That's our fight, and we've made it our fight because of our own Kamajoria and our own limitations, and we should acknowledge that, and we should take ownership of that. Ona di Larai was about the darja and the alienation of the Sikhs from their mool, from their source as the Guru Panth, and they wanted to exist as the Guru Panth, and they did up until their Akhri Dam. They're facing the battle, tank battles or whatever. Akhri Dam tak they existed as the Guru Khalsa. And they wanted to teach us about our gulami, our subjugation, our homelessness, mansik gulami, however you want to see it, and our lack of any political agency in this world. That you see jinya marjiya manga rakh lo, that you're not going to get the mangde vatte tanu insaf nahi milna. You can place any our issues, the issues of the Panth that we talk about, that these are the Panth issue, water rights, agricultural issues, capital, language issues. We've been talking about that since 1947. Before 1947, there's been zero progress on any of those issues whatsoever. The only progress we see in that entire period is like the Jujaru Lair and his Sant Jarnail Singh, whose starting point is Singha de na kanda de utte likhe hoye. Because the human rights discourse is, let's talk about this now, and then later on, strategically, like let's be strategic. That's what we're kind of told, right? Like let's talk about this now, and then later on we'll get what we're asking for. Versus Sant Jarnail Singh's starting point is adekho Singha de na likhe hoye, another insaf asi lenaya, another shaheediyan da mull pauna, that we're gonna set the value of their shaheediyan through our kind of actions. So they shattered this whole kind of like domestication and subservience of Sikhs that had been existing for like a very long time before, and arguably, some Sikhs would say, oh, I'm free, like, I have no restrictions because I can make money or I can be successful or whatever. But their notion of like what that is tied to like their own like dunyavi grist, like not even grist jivan, like their dunyavi like jivan that's tied to like, their own kind of individualism. Like I have like, I can do something and I can have like Kaar or whatever, but Qaum ta azad thoroa, like they're two different things. So Sant Ji's legacy and that legacy of that whole kind of Jujaru movement is outside of this realm where we kind of put them today. Sant Ji isn't an icon of like, justice and like human rights and stuff. They're an icon of like Miri Piri and Shastran ke Adeen hai Raj, and like very, very different ideas that kind of we need to create more space for within our kind of our discourse.
What about the arrests that take place after? We did speak about that, but that was something that went to.
Yeah, I mean, like the Jodhpur arrests, and then some of the like by Labh Singh, when you go to Jodhpur jail as well, right? And then they're broken out, or some of the Singhs are broken out from there, and that kind of begins like a different period. But essentially, what happens is those that weren't Shaheed during the battle, that they were either they were killed by the army afterwards, or they were arrested and they were taken to prison. The only people that kind of managed to survive is some of the SGPC guys. I remember you telling me the story of the Singh who's hiding in the bushes because Sant Ji told him to.
There was Inderjeet Singh Baggi and the secretary of the Akaali Dal, Gurdwara Singh, who had conspired and had Bhai Harmandir Singh Ji Shaheed.
Yeah.
And because of the Morcha was going at the time, like Sant Ji said that we're not going to touch them. But during the battle, Sant Ji had sent someone to close to where they were like, hiding, and obviously because they weren't fighting.
The Akaali Dal guys weren't fighting.
The Akaali Dals weren't fighting. And if like days after the battle had finished, when they had all come out, there was a bit of a commotion and someone threw a grenade at those two guys and they died in there. And then the Sangathan, and then the army killed the Singh. We don't know who that Singh is, but we just know that his one mission was that like whatever happens.
Sant knew they'd surrender.
Yeah,
that's true. You never thought about
that. So Sant, the Sodhi, because it's 40 years since Surinder Singh Sodhi. So to pay a little bit of homage. So, but after Bhai Surinder Singh Sodhi's Shaheedi, obviously the Singhs go on a mission to avenge it. And famously, Sant Ji says we'll get Badala.
24 hours.
And writes it, on the walls in front of the SGPC office as well. Yeah, so they're aware that the word is out. Sant Jarnail Singh Ji is a right hand man. Surinder Singh Sodhi has been made Shaheed, and the Akaali Dal have helped conspired to do it. And the kind of muscle that was used, so to speak, the muscle that was used was killed by the Singhs. Baba Manu Chal, General Labh Singh take badla for that. And the key conspirator is this Gurdwara Singh, secretary, is the key conspirator, and I believe. Again, I don't know the references, but he has authority. He says he has authority of Longowal as well. Will that be Badja in that in that situation? So it's interesting to know, isn't it? He's kind of spared from there. He's spared from anything in the attack. Before the attack because of the Morcha, and later Sant Ji set up a Singh ki bhi ida bhi hisab kitab lena, hai na?
And now we've pretty much kind of concluded that battle period that we've been speaking about. Is there anything we're going to touch upon before we finish off this podcast and talk about the aftermath in the final part?
I think it's one Singh's name is Avatar Singh Parowal, who did Kirtan for 72 hours within that Hamla and eventually got Shaheed.
For sure, yeah.
And I know, a lot's been said, but I think, if we class this Gurdwara's 74 Gurdwara being attacked the same week. It's basically a full-scale act of war on Sikhism. You cannot say anything else about it. It's clearly Sikhs versus the India now. There's no other notion that exists in between.
What's interesting about that as well is it reminds me of, if you want to think about the Sikh spirit of resistance, is after that battle, such a gruesome battle, such a huge battle. Jade Singh managed to get out to continue the Sangharsh afterwards. Jathadar Sukhdev Singh Ji Babbar, like they did a counterpart for all the Singhs Singh Darbar Sahib Shaheed away, and then he issues a speech, a tape, doing Shraddhanjali to all the Shaheeds, but also declaring war against the state. He was in early 30s at that point, and he's standing like he doesn't know how many of the Singhs of Ginne Rejande or whatever. There's a handful of Singhs left, and he's declaring war like now. That now there's war on the state.
And there's like young Singhs and Singhniya that see like the demolished Akaal Takhat after, you know, Sangats allowed inside to move freely. And they pick up the little pieces of Akaal Takhat and they put them in their kamar kase or in their pockets, and these then Singhs go on to like fight in the Jajaru lair, and when they're Shaheed, you know, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਚੋਲਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕਮਰ ਕੱਸਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ you find the little you know, rocks from Akaal Takhat. There's another in Pant Prakash, when they talk about like the Vadda Kallukara, ਉੱਥੇ ਰਤਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਪੰਗੂ ਲਿਖਦਾ, like, you know, when the Khalsa did like Gurmate and stuff, following that, one of the Gurmate, how they understood it was ਜੋ ਨਿਕ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹ ਰਾਜ ਲਏ, ਜੋ ਮਰੇ ਗੁਰ ਪਰ ਜਾਏ, ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਘੇਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਗਏ ਆ ਹੁਣ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਆ ਰਾਜ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰਨਾ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੁਣ ਮਰ ਗਏ ਆ ਉਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਪਿਆਰੇ ਹੋ ਗਏ, ਗੁਰੂਆਂ ਦੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚਲ ਗਏ ਆ. And that's the same way we look at like every single battle, whether it's like ਚਮਕੌਰ ਦੀ ਗੜੀ or like ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਘੇਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਕਿ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹੀ ਦਾਵਾ ਕਾਇਮ ਕਰਨਾ, ਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਗਾਂਹ ਤੋਰਨੀ ਆ. So like that's the like the Khalistan's foundation now, like where the Galabat is now, is being laid with the Shaheediya of those Shaheeds from like Darbar Sahib, and that's the starting point of the conversation. And like for me, like, you know, I mean, we can continue this Galabat. I think I don't know how long we've been kind of talking for it now, but there's so much to it. But one of the things for me is, you know, like today, like some of the conversation amongst Sikhs is that we need justice for 1984. You may have seen that, like, you know, Galabat and like, you know, Sikhs talking about like, we want justice, you know, kind of thing. Like these surme were so great. Like how the Panth remembers their Suram Gati, that ke oho Darbar Sahib da insaf sanu naal de satte ch dege. Like following the Darbar Sahib attack, what was created gave the Qawm the only insaf that they have ever seen, and like
or desired.
And our, you know, Sadi Qabiliyat isn't to give insaf to these law. Like Sadi Qabiliyat, like we don't have the capacity or the capability even 40 years later to give justice, like, and even on a dunyavi sense. Forget like, you know, the Khalsa's tradition, being sovereign, etc. Even on a dunyavi sense, we don't have the capacity to give justice whatsoever. And we don't even have the capacity to acknowledge the justice that they've given us as part of mainstream Sikh advocacy discourse, that this is what justice for Darbar Sahib looks like. Sadi agli gal Khalistan diya. Like, when are you leaving Punjab? When are you removing this border? When is Punjab being reunified? And when are you taking your troops and going across the Yamuna to Delhi? Like, remove your occupation is the conversation, not reform of the structures, not, you know, water rights, not like agricultural rights. Our conversation can't be today, oh my God, why is Punjab suffering? Or like, oh my God, why is Punjab being destroyed? That means you haven't understood
seeing the contrast,
the whole movement and the history of it.
Seeing the contrast of the mentalities, like, you know, the Gursikhs is on one side, like even the children, like, you know, you're talking about the picking up the pieces. There's one Saki I remember that before the battle, there were like houses and buildings that were close to the Darbar Sahib, and like some of the kids in the area in like the Mahalle had like built like these little broad drawbridges, like wooden ones, to join from their houses over to the thing. And one of the landlords, I think he was a Hindu landlord, and he was saying to them that, listen, like, and you know, they were trying to get like, you know, makeshift arms or whatever they had, whatever they could get hold of, and the landlord says to them, he goes, what are you doing in it? He goes, the army's coming, what are you guys doing in it? And their response, and these are children, like must have been pre-teens, their response was, Bapu de karte hamla hon laga te asi dargah ja ke muh nahi dekha sakte if we don't stand. So that's their kind of thought process, and obviously what Shamsher is saying is how obviously we need to do justice to that. And the whole Saki, like, you know, I mean, we can talk about like the human rights violations, etc. But even talking about the Jodhpur Singhs, you know, when they'd been detained, they're being taken away to like far places away from Punjab, away from their families, tortured, etc., etc. But even there, like the Sakis that come out of that, and it's full of Chardi Kala. They talk about how like there were water pipes that were linking the cells that were like disconnected, and they were doing Santhya through the pipes.
Oh.
Because they didn't have obviously good Kesabs, and so over that time that they were there, the 4-5 saal sige, that any of the really youngsters or people who didn't have Santhya, didn't have that, they were doing, the other Gursikhs were giving Santhya through the pipes, and by the end of it, like, you know, they're all like, you know, Nitnemi Gursikh and stuff. So like the whole thing is just, you know, you can't find this sadness that you know, some people try to find.
I have like a final question to finish off with, but before that, we've been speaking for about 9 hours, I think, in total from these 3 episodes, and the word Khalistan has come on, but we've never actually talked about where the word came from. We spoke about offline. So this big word Khalistan, when was the first time it was referenced? Who made this word up, and so on?
I mean, like historically, Khalistan comes from Khalsa Raj. Like throughout every era, whether it's like, Begumpura, Halimi Raj, Khalsa Raj, Khalistan, it's all pointing to the same thing. Ki eho jiha nizam sirje jave, jis naal lokan da bhala hove. Like we want to create an administration that benefits people. And Khalistan, like as a first term, is kind of used like in a pamphlet by like Dr. Veer Singh Bhatti or something like in the 1970s. 1943. So it is, and it's presented in by the Indian state. They want us to not like that word. They want that word to be a word that we're afraid of. And if we are, then us being afraid of that word is the only success that the Indian government has from the Battle of Amritsar in June 1984. That's the only victory that they can possibly attain from that. So, that is something that we should be proud of. That's something that gives us an alternative imagination. Khalistan doesn't come out of a reaction, or doesn't come out of like, we were wronged, therefore we want Khalistan. The Khalsa has always been sovereign. The Khalsa Sadivi Sadi Jeri Sari Galbaat ya, it is to express our Azad Hond Hasti, to exist autonomously, to live our Sikhi autonomously. That is the purpose for which the Khalsa has been created. And jera koi bhi zulm karda, us zulm de khilaf karna, us zulm di akarpanani, to break the egoist power that wants to oppress people. And in Pant Prakash it says Khalsa hove khud khuda jim khubi khub khudaye aan na manne aan ki ek sache bin Padshahi. That our Padshahi is Khalsa hove khud khuda, so we are sovereign, we claim our sovereignty is divine. Jim khubi khub khudaye, just like the beauty of nature is self-evident within nature, that's the same way our sovereignty, our Padshahi is self-evident within us. That we don't recognize kise da zor over us or claim over us, ek sache bin Padshahi. That was sadan jira nata ya Guru de naal ya. And that relationship that we have with Guru Sahib, that's been built through prem, through like multiple different jamme, like you when people learn about Sikhi, like there's a lot to learn, but one thing that's really easy to understand is that relationship Sikh da Guru de naal, ta Guru da Sikh de naal, ek prem da nata ya. Like it's a relationship that's built on prem, and it's because of that prem that Guru Sahib has taught us to not live under the adeengi, not live under the authority of anyone else. And we manifest that continuously, whether it's like, Guru Sahib's like a furman, like our teaching of what the purpose of the Khalsa is. Durjan ke maar beko, sankat nivar beko, Khalso banayo hai, like that's in like Senapati's Gursobha. But it is Dharam Chalavan Santo Baran, Dushta Saban ko Mool Oparan, or like through our bol bale, Garib ki rakhya, Jarwane ki pakhya. And you see that idea repeated through all of our bol bale, through our Atiyas, through Gurbani, all of our like Atiyas that we look at, whether it's Chote Sahibzade, whether it's Charkhriyan te Chare Gaye, whether it's like Bota Singh, Garja Singh, like Banda Singh Bahadur, Shahadat, Lal Kila, like all of the Atiyas is all about the same idea. Ki dushman de asi adeen gini manani, that we're not going to live as a subservient entity. That our only demand, our first and last demand, is that we have to exist autonomously. And that's where the idea of Khalistan comes in, and we want to have space to create that type of structure within which we can flourish. And where there's oppression, or where there's tyranny, where there's subjugation or domination, that the Khalsa should be able to mount a challenge to that and destroy that oppressive power structure, and create a space. Or Sarbat da Pala doesn't mean like the welfare of humanity. It means radical co-creation and coexistence. So it's not about just like feeding people langar because they're hungry. It's destroying the structure that's making them hungry. It's about questioning the nature of power and sovereignty, really deep ideas and really deep questions which Sikhi teaches us directly. Like, je assi kaal de pujari hain, then how can we worship any do tikki da dunyavi raja, like King Charles is meant to be our king? Like, wo bichare kol khar nahi hunda, how can he be the claim sovereignty over the Khalsa Panth? We know somebody who's coming from a lineage of like inbreeding and oppression. How can that individual claim sovereignty over what? Odi Paatshai kitho aayi hai? So like the Paatshai of the Khalsa is from a far, far greater and grander and much, much more idealistic prem parya, like concept of what it means to exist in the dunya. And that's what Khalistan is a manifestation of. And that's what Raj Karega Khalsa Aki Rahena Koi, that's what that is all tied to.
Well, thank you for giving a background and context to Khalistan. And what I thought I'll do now is that I'll just summarize the podcast that we've done today. Then I'll finish off with a question just for everyone to finish off with. So, you know, in the first podcast, we covered about, 400 years, 500 years with the horse. And second one, quite a lot of centuries. And then second one, we covered 4 years. Now in this podcast, we've covered just 2 years in so much detail. So thank you so much, for sharing all that with the Sangat, from 1982 up to 1984 and going through 1984 June, day by day, giving us so much details. So again, to the Sangat, please make sure that you do ask your questions. If you have any comments, please leave in the comment section as well. And just the final thing to finish off with, because this podcast will come out, in June, right? And it's going to be 40 years, right? So, now it's 40 years later, just the first thing that comes to mind, what would be your message to the Sangat? It's been 40 years now. What should we be doing as the Sangat? Or just anything that comes to mind, first thing that comes to mind, marking 40 years since June 1984. What is the final vichar you want to leave with the Sangat on this podcast?
I think first thing is it poses a big, massive challenge. When Sant Ji said, ਜਦੋਂ ਭਾਰਤ ਦੀ ਫੌਜ ਦੇ ਕਦਮ ਪੈਣਗੇ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਨੀਂਹ ਰੱਖੀ ਜਾਊਗੀ, ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਦੀ ਨੀਂਹ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ, does it takes us 40 years to finish the house? No, we finish that in 4 months, a year or something. So it poses a bigger challenge to us. ਨੀਂਹ ਰੱਖੀ ਗਈ ਹੈ, we need to build on that. We need to work towards our goal, because we're not goalless now. We've got a very much defined goal, which is our Azad Kar Khalistan. So we need to ask that question to ourselves: what are we doing towards that? Whether whatever Gun Maharaj has given you to write or to speak or to agitate or to do whatever, are you putting that gun towards that car? I mean, ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਘਰ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ. ਸਵੇਰੇ 9 to 5, we work endlessly, and then we get a bigger house, then another bigger house. What about this Panth da Kaar? Who's going to put effort towards that? It's us, hai na? And this 40 years, these Singhs are actually literally, standing in our face, asking us, we gave our Shaheediyan for you guys. What have you guys done from there? And it poses a lot of question to all of us, our generation. Because ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਤੋਂ ਗਾਂ ਪਿਛਲੀ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਅੱਧੀ ਨਾਲੋਂ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮੁਕਾ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਗਈ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਗਈ. ਚਾਹੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ 84 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਨਵੰਬਰ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਅਗਲੇ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ, ਗੁਰਿਲਾ ਵਾਰਫੇਅਰ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਸਾਰੀ ਆਰਮਡ ਰੈਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ. So it's been 40 years. They have played their part. They have left a big, huge legacy. What are we going to leave? And no matter how long it takes, how painful the journey is, and no matter how much we're going to lose while walking on their footsteps, we have to achieve the goal. That is the hukam. That is the hukam from the Panth. So that is what we need to all work towards it, and leave our little differences beyond. There's no point. If we go back to Sant Ji's time, they never used to think ye Khand Kitni Jathe da Singh hai, ta ye Fulana Singh hai, ye Kaar Seva da Singh hai. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਹਾਰਡ ਲਾਈਨਰ, ਸੌਫਟ ਲਾਈਨਰ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਅੱਗੇ. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਭੱਜ ਗਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰਤੀਤ ਵੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਅੱਗੇ ਆ ਗਈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਖੜਾ ਰਹਿ ਗਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਆ ਗਈ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਗਏ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਲਾਸ਼ਾਂ ਹੀ ਘਰ ਜਾਣਗੀਆਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਘਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਲਈ ਲੜਾਂਗੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਲੈਗੇਸੀ ਹੋ ਗਈ, ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਹੁਣ ਇਟਸ ਨਾਓ ਆਰ ਟਰਨ. how much we normalize this Khalistan in our day-to-day life. ਸਾਡੇ ਘਰ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਇਹਦੀ, ਸਿਰਫ ਪੋਡਕਾਸਟ 'ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਹਰ ਘਰ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ. ਜੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ? You know, then we need to challenge them. ਕਿ ਇੰਨੇ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ, 40 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ, and I feel really sorry about the prachar that's happening in our Gurdwara. I'm sorry to say this, but I'll have to say this. And I think we started the podcast by saying ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅੱਜ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੌਣ ਕਰੇਗਾ? Maharaj talks about Sikhi being very relevant to the time. You know, when we started off with this where Maharaj said Babar, Jabbar at the same time he was alive and Maharaj was alive. Are we ready to say that in the face of the tyrant without having any sort of, implications, worrying about the implications or any negativity that's going to bounce back to us? Are we that azad? And sometime, when I read some chithiyan from the Bandi Singhs that are inside the jails, and ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਛ ਕੀਤਾ ਸਾਡੀ ਪੱਗ ਵਾਪਸ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿਰ 'ਤੇ ਰੱਖਣ ਲਈ. 30 ਸਾਲ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਅਸੀਂ 40 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ 30-35 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਜੇਲ੍ਹਾਂ 'ਚ ਪਏ ਨੂੰ. ਸੋ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਕੋਈ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਕੋਈ ਨਿਕਲਦਾ, ਰੀਡਿੰਗ ਦ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਔਰ the day they came out on a payroll or something and they say something, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਜੇਲ੍ਹ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਆਜ਼ਾਦ ਨੇ ਅਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਰਹਿ ਕੇ ਗੁਲਾਮ ਹਾਂ, ਕਿਤੇ ਨਾ ਕਿਤੇ. And I think that is the challenge. We need to challenge ourselves ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ. ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਛੱਡ ਦਿੱਤੇ, ਸਭ ਕੁਛ ਛੱਡ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੱਸੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਕੋਈ ਮਿਹਣਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ. Now it's our turn. What can we do?
ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਜੀ. ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਸਰਕਾਰੀ narrative is ਭਾਰੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਹੁਣ they're trying to infiltrate this narrative through many ways. Sikh ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਇਹੀ ਆ is understand and challenge. Understand what the Sikh narrative is around 1984, around the Galbat of Khalistan. Understand what it is, why it's there, and also challenge. And also challenge whether that's within Sikh spaces and out. We've got great organizations trying to combat it from an external perspective. But recently we've been seeing internally in Sikhi spaces, in like Amritari spaces, the creeping in of, oh, what about this, what about that, maybe should have, would have, could have. The what ifs don't happen in we don't vichar what ifs. Chamkaur Sahib japa what if nahi kende. What about this, what about that, the best case scenarios ਨਹੀਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਵਿਚਾਰਦੇ. So ਇਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਪਛਾਣੋ ਕਿ who is trying to kind of save their own skin in light of this situation, trying to make best use case of their stock to make sure it doesn't diminish against the people's pictures who are on the wall here today. ਇਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਛਾਣੋ, understand and challenge the narrative that's been presented in front of us. It's probably not been easier as in terms of how much resources out there. No, it's probably not been easier, That'd be my message.
Thank you so much. Last two of it.
For me, it's threefold really. One is to celebrate the Shaheeds of our recent Atiyas at every opportunity that you can. Jithe tanu koi Shaheedi smagam disdaya, like any dahara. Like if you have an annual calendar, every single day there's a Shaheedi that's tied to this recent time. So don't look at this as like some distant kind of history. That's a really important thing that we can do. We learn about, and through that celebrating them, the second thing is we learn about this Atiyas. We learn about their Jivans. That's really important. Like websites like 1984 Tribute has like Jivaniya of all of these things. There's so many projects that are dedicated to this. And the third thing is organize. And we have to organize because we can't look towards any other institution, and there's massive limitations on what today is what we call Sikh advocacy. It all falls within very limiting discourses. All of the mainstream Sikh advocacy discourses around June 84 are all around recognized Sikh genocide petition type activity. Which is completely, like in my opinion, is completely meaningless and a disservice to that entire Atiyas, because their galus begins from recognize the genocide, which like who recognized what a genocide, like we know it was a genocide, we know what happened to us. So that for me, those three things go hand in hand, is like celebrating their Shaheediyan, learning about their Jeevans, learning about this Ityas. You're not going to learn this in schools. You're going to have to learn this and educate yourself. The work that we're trying to do through Khalistan Center, the Panth Punjab Project, NSYF, etc., is all been around these ideas. And yeah, like that organizing part is important, because unless we have Sikh Naujawan organizing and creating new spaces and new ways for this Ityas to be shared, we're going to kind of like stagnate in that. So we need like constantly new upralle, whether it's like, through camps, whether it's through exhibitions, whether it's through like film, like whatever it is, however we're kind of organizing to teach like the next generation and tackle these really big questions about like what does it mean to be Sikh and British. Can those two things coexist, and how do they coexist, and where is the conflict that is coming? So creating spaces where we can have these conversations, where we can start sharpening our intellect and our discourse, and we can start shedding some of these really like deeply entrenching Ghulam ideas of, Sikhs are loyal, soldiers, and we're a model minority, and, we want to change the system from within. Like really kind of ideas that have been proven to be failures shouldn't be part of the leading edge of like Panthic discourse. They're not a part of Panthic discourse for a start, but they should no way direct like Panthic advocacy, and we need to create those alternative spaces. It's really, really important.
Thank you, Bhai Sahib. And any final words?
I think the Singhs have quite elaborated on that quite well. It just reminds me of what they were saying of like Sant Ji's Aakhri Bachan on the 3rd of June, when he said that like this regime has kind of marked about that to all the other previous regimes. It's surpassed all the sin of the previous regimes of the British and the Mughals. The Indians have, like with the assault on Darbar Sahib, and he goes his jor appeal to the Sikh Sangatan was pe kamar kasa karke turn. So I think that summarizes what the Singhs were saying.
I think that's a perfect point to finish on. So thank you so much again to all the Gurmukhs for coming on this podcast. Spending spending the whole day here recording these podcasts for the Sangat. So thank you again for coming together and doing this and taking that time out in your busy schedules. And again, to the Sangat, please support the Seva of these Gurmukhs, the different Seva. I'll put the links in the description to the organizations, the Seva that they're doing as well, and resources to more information if you want to learn more about, all the events we've spoken about as well. And of course, just giving that plug to the, the documentary you guys went, the Battle of Amritsar. Definitely when you have those screenings, up and down the country, which I'm guessing you do around the June time, definitely check it out. I think it's very emotional as well, right? Definitely, that's one thing that stands out to me, and you feel that link, so definitely check that out. But we put all the links in the description.
There's a new exhibition by Panthic Media and different Jathebandiyan. It's a multimedia exhibition around June 1984, featuring like educational like slides and like videos, etc. And it's going to be in display in Canada, America, and the UK. Babrak Ali Lair is going to be displaying that exhibition here in Gurdwara across the UK this June.
So thank you again so much for finishing off here. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.